Chapter 961. I bet on the heart of the flame. Monk's ability to break through is too strong. Even the defense of the Black Dragon Hurlo team can't stop him. I bet on the heart of the flame too. Before the game began, the dragons were busy placing their bet. Many figures had gathered inside and outside the stadium. Now, in addition to the dragons, there were also many magicians and even magisters who came to watch. In addition to all kinds of entertainment, the Hersino Magic Tower also opened up all kinds of new ways to earn points. One of them was giving lectures. As long as a topic of a dragon's was approved and a lecture was given, apart from getting fixed points, the more human magicians listened to the lecture, the more share points they would get. For someone of Quio's level, he could earn a lot just by giving one lecture. He gave 3 lectures on the application of the fire element, and the points he earned made a group of young dragons, who usually didn't work hard to improve, go crazy with envy. The sanatorium had become a combination of academy and entertainment city. Roddy's constantly updated various ways of entertainment really opened the eyes of the dragons. Billiards, tennis, basketball, golf, and other entertainment sports with perfect rules made the dragons not even know which to play. Because of the existence of the Dragons Alliance, all kinds of giant dragons who didn't have much contact with each other in the past found a space here to learn from each other and compete. After a simple calculation, it would be found that out of the thousands of members of the 5 major dragons, more than 70% had been here. Pass the ball. Push the ball. Yes. Shoot. Shoot. Sigh. Rubens jumped and shouted, and Sticka also cheered for him with the green dragons beside him. Rhodey handed them 2 cups of drink. The 2 of them thanked him and gulped it down in one gulp. After that, they gasped for breath and said, "I was wondering what they wanted to do here. I am willing to fly back and forth every day to watch this kind of competition. These guys from the Red Dragons used to be so arrogant. We must suppress their arrogance on the court. That's good. We'll come here regularly to relax in the future." As soon as Roddy finished speaking, the striker of the Red Dragon team, Monk, flashed past the Black Dragon Hurlo defenders with a series of dazzling passing moves. He raised his leg to shoot, but the ball that flew in an arc was punched away by the tall goalkeeper of the Black Dragon Hurlo. The crowd in the field seemed to be controlled by a large hand as they screamed and screamed. "Steel gate! Who? Whoosh!" Rubens had no time to answer Roddy's question. Instead, he followed the Black Dragon Hurlo and shouted the slogan in unison. This was the trademark provocation of the Black Dragon Hurlo tribe after they succeeded in defending. The Red Dragons responded by booing in pity. The dragons were not the only ones watching the game. There were also various mages, pharmacists, and other humans who had obtained the right to enter the magic tower. The more people there were, the more exciting the game was. Even the dragons, who were used to living alone, could not avoid this kind of group effect. Roddy did not disturb them. After saying goodbye to Rubens and Sticka, he left the auditorium. Below, Kardashian was wearing a sun hat and a long dress that highlighted her curve. She held a glass of fruit juice with ice cubes in her hand and drank it with relish. Her attire was gorgeous and eye-catching, causing the female dragons who were dressed like country bumpkins to chase after her and ask how to customize her dress. "Let's meet up later. I'll tell you how to do 3D tailoring." Kardashian waved at a petite green dragon beauty. She then turned to Roddy and said, "Eshin went to study Go. Iskar knows how to make progress. He went to the thesis review area and said he wanted to see the direction of crystal research. He seems to be very interested in crystal technology," Roddy said as he and Kardashian left the half-plane where the court was located. After arriving at the central lounge of the entertainment area, he found a sofa and sat down. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. "Maybe it has something to do with the conflict between you and Quail." He used to look up to Quail as his idol. "In the end, the power of your weapon could even defeat the Lord." Kardashian was just guessing. She shrugged and said, "The red dragons have some kind of power complex. It hasn't changed for so many years." After listening to this explanation, Roddy more or less understood Iskar's way of doing things. But at this time, his purpose was not just to enjoy himself. He looked around and pointed to the magic clock next to him. "Then I'll go do something else first. Let's meet at the canteen for dinner. It's best if everyone is there. Go. It's been hard on you for so long without mentioning Sally. Oh, and Natha." Kardashian looked at him with a faint smile and pointed up. "What's that saying again? Absence makes the heart grow fonder?" Ahem. Roddy coughed awkwardly. Although he was now thick-skinned, he could not help but blush a little. Kardashian liked to see him embarrassed. Fortunately, there were other dragons around, so she did not do something more excessive to torment Roddy. After walking out of the entertainment area, he heaved a sigh of relief. He went upstairs and knocked on the door of the king's office. There was no magnificent decoration here. There was only a simple but elegant wooden desk and a shelf specially for storing all kinds of files. But before Roddy could take a closer look, Sally threw herself into his arms. "You stinky guy. Finally settled them?" Not long after ascending the throne, he had to continue to endure the pain of separation. Although Sally could chat with him almost every day through the magic circle for the past few months, the lovesickness could not be resolved by the magic circle after all. Naturally, Sally was pleasantly surprised that Roddy suddenly rushed over with the dragons today. But after a brief meeting and greeting, Roddy brought the dragons to the entertainment area. He had been busy until now, and she really missed him very much. Seeing the Prime Minister, Her Majesty immediately hung on Roddy like a koala bear, and then kissed him without a care. The two lingered for a few minutes before letting go. Fortunately, there were not that many servants in Sally's place. Once the door was closed, no one outside could hear the sound inside. Of course, Roddy also missed the king's wife very much. But this time, he naturally did not come to get intimate with her. The matter of the cabinet has temporarily come to an end. This sudden visit is mainly about the Forest of Silence. Sally knew that he was worried about Natha's injury, but only then did she realize that things were not that simple. "You need to investigate the identity of the attacker? That's one thing. The main thing is about the ruins. There are not enough clues on the dragons, so I can only look for it myself." As usual, Roddy sat on the bed with the Queen in his arms. He was a little intoxicated by the fragrance of Sally's body. Sally usually did not step out of the magic tower. When there was no magic circle meeting, she would wear a loose and comfortable long dress. When she curled up in Roddy's arms, her eyes were full of love. "Are you going to personally take command?" "No, I intend to look for it myself. This matter." Chapter 962. With that, Sally pretended to strangle Roddy's neck. "Do you dare to try?" "Of course not. I won't make the same mistake again." Roddy kissed her. "But this matter is very important now. It involves the demons and the high elves. It's also related to our future strategy. I need to find out as much as I can." Sally knew that she had always been forward-thinking. While others were sighing that the kingdom of Karen had finally stabilized, Roddy was indeed planning ahead to find the demon's weakness. But she really did not think it would be so urgent. Must it be now? The sooner the better. The ruins have been excavated. No one knows if someone will destroy the site in the next few days. And what secrets the group of people who took away the things in the ruins have may also be the key to finding the answer. Sally frowned slightly. "Then who do you plan to go with? Kardashian? If she goes, even with the strength of the dragons, they may be defeated if they encounter those unreasonable guys. So, for the sake of safety, I will try to get more allies," Roddy said with a serious expression. "I haven't asked Natha where she is before coming here. Take me to see her. I need to know the details. Downstairs, ICU 1. As Sally spoke, she suddenly jumped down. Go and find her. She's blaming herself for this. Go and talk to her. I'll go see Kardashian first. Otherwise, it will be impolite. Huh. Roddy looked at her in a daze. Then he realized that she wanted him to go see Natha. But what did that mean? He swallowed and felt a little guilty. But things had already come to this point. There was no point in pretending. Roddy simply tidied up his clothes and walked downstairs. When he knocked on the door of the ICU, Natha was obviously shocked and excited. But the next second, she forcibly suppressed the smile on her face and lowered her head. Prime Minister, she paused for a few seconds and rubbed her eyes. Why are you here? Taking a deep breath, Roddy sorted out his emotions and tried his best to speak in a calm tone. The silent forest isn't simple, so I came here to investigate. At the same time, I want to see how you are recovering. As he spoke, he pointed to the house. Can we talk inside? Yes. Prime Minister, please come in. Natha hurriedly went back to tidy up the house. In fact, there was not much to tidy up. Her life had always been very simple. Apart from a glass of water, some information, and the notes she had organized according to her memory, the house was very clean. Roddy closed the door behind him and sat on a chair. You're injured, so you don't have to pour me any water. Sit down and talk. Natha obediently sat at the side. Roddy said softly, There are only the two of us here. You don't have to be so serious. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's, and she remained silent as usual. Roddy then asked about what happened, and Natha answered them one by one. It was just that her response was like interrogating a criminal. He could see that Natha should be very happy, but she was able to suppress her emotions as if nothing had happened. This ability made Roddy feel a little helpless. In fact, when he knew that Natha was seriously injured and was about to die, the anger in his heart had made Roddy understand his true thoughts. Now, seeing her sitting there shyly and twisting her fingers, Roddy suddenly realized that he could no longer beat around the bush, so he no longer asked about the details of the culprit. Instead, he stretched out his hand and said, Come, let me see your hand. Is it recovering well? Natha was stunned, and then timidly raised her hand. Roddy directly grabbed it and pulled it over. How is your strength recovering? Try pinching me. He raised his head and looked at the wood elf, but the latter's eyes were abnormally scattered, and there was no reaction at all. Roddy shook her hand, and only then did Natha gently apply force, but she did not dare to withdraw her hand. Morales said that she did her best. I don't think there will be any mistakes. Roddy then shifted his gaze to her slender legs under her nightdress. What about your feet? Natha retracted her feet as if she was scalded. Because she was wearing slippers and the room was unusually warm, there was no place for her white and tender toes to hide even if she wanted to. Finally, she embarrassedly replied, My feet are fine. They are recovering very well. Roddy laughed out loud. What are you afraid of? She just shook her head, and her whole body was like a snail that was about to shrink back into its shell. And with her hand being held by Roddy, she wanted to withdraw her hand, but as if attracted by some kind of force, she could not bear to do so. Seeing her like this, Roddy could not help but stretch out his other hand and gently pinch Natha's cheek. Do you really have to keep your words to yourself? This action really crossed a certain boundary for Natha. She suddenly realized something and raised her head to look at Roddy. Her eyes could no longer hide the surprise in them, and the next second, they were filled with tears. She slightly turned her face, and like a cat enjoying a pet, she leaned against Roddy's palm, letting the tears flow continuously. Being able to discover a new ruin is already a very good completion of the mission. I did not ask you to fight the enemy head-on. Don't feel guilty about it. Roddy gently wiped away her tears. Natha felt that she was a little embarrassed, and she used her sleeve to wipe away her tears. But thinking of everything that had happened, she could not help but wipe away more and more tears. I will go there tomorrow to take a look. Natha suddenly froze and said anxiously, No. Then she immediately covered her mouth. No, of course I will not put myself in danger. Come, let's go eat dinner together. I will bring you to meet a few people. Seeing her frightened look, Roddy laughed. What, do you still want me to be the Prime Minister? No, then don't be so reserved. I still hope that you, my disciple, will surpass you in the future. How can you surpass me if you are always like this? Natha suddenly smiled. Roddy had rarely seen her so relaxed and tranquil. This kind of tension was indeed something that he had never seen since he met Natha. He felt that this wood elf seemed to have some kind of change in her mentality, but he could not figure out what exactly had changed. Looking at the sunset outside the window, Roddy stood up and said, "Then change your clothes. I will wait for you outside and we will go to the cafeteria together." Okay. Natha watched him walk out of the door without saying anything else. However, after the wooden door closed, she jumped a few times in place like a child, rubbing her cheeks hard with both hands. After a long time, she finally calmed down. 10 o'clock for dinner. Sally, Kardashian, and the other 4 dragons had already come out of the entertainment area. The cafeteria of the Magic Tower had been expanded several times. In order to meet the tastes of the dragons, they had even hired dragons to manage the kitchen. Fortunately, these dragons were not all big eaters. Other than the different cooking methods and food preferences from humans, there was not much difference in what they ate. In the cafeteria, the dragons were discussing various topics. In the past, there was a barrier between different dragons. When the sanatorium first opened, basically only the dragons of the same race would sit together to eat. But now, the situation had changed. As far as the eye could see, dragons who got along well with each other could be seen everywhere in the cafeteria. They were not as cold and aloof as humans imagined. Many dragons talked more nonsense than human bards, and it was common for them to even sing operas while chatting. Haha, Caitlin is actually with that green dragon. If those fools knew, they would definitely find a cliff and jump off together. Rubens pointed to a man and woman who were sitting together eating not far away, his expression exaggerated and comical. Caitlin was one of the few beauties of the Black Dragon Hurlow race. Many young Black Dragon Hurlow had coveted her for a long time, but in the end she was beaten to it by a green dragon. It was really ridiculous. Dragons did not have reproductive isolation. They could still reproduce together, but their bloodlines would not hybridize. Instead, it would be dominated by the stronger one. There were not many examples of this in history, but in the current environment where dragons lived, cross-species love had become common. Stika glanced at it and cursed inwardly. That lucky Stala! How did he manage to get his hands on it? Hey, look, that red dragon girl over there is really hot. Ahem. Eshin coughed, and Iskar brought 2 glasses of wine. Keep it down. If you keep talking like that, you'll probably get beaten up. Chapter 963. The 2 young dragons gulp. This place was different from the Dragon Tower. It was surrounded by big shots, and they could not afford to offend them. Look, these guys are not serious at all. What's the difference between them and humans when they act wretchedly? Kardashian complained to the queen, who was sitting beside her, and the latter giggled. Sally was now used to communicating with the dragons as equals. She originally thought that after becoming the queen, she would become a lonely person, with no friends because of her power and status. However, the dragons did not care about her identity at all. This atmosphere made Sally feel very comfortable. There was no conflict of interest between them. Even listening to them gossiping was interesting. Edith was also sitting at the edge. She had a special identity, but Kardashian would occasionally talk to her. The other dragons knew that she was the director of the sanatorium, and when it came to the entertainment area, they would politely ask her about it. Roddy and Natha were the last to arrive. The waiter was pushing the dining cart and placing the dishes on the table. Natha did not know how to dress up for such an occasion. Finally, under Roddy's suggestion, she changed into a formal dress and tied up her long hair. As a wood elf, her appearance was already outstanding. After her body was healed by Moralis, even the lines of her muscles seemed to be more coordinated. Now that she was dressed up, she was not inferior to a group of dragons. Kardashian glanced at Natha's slightly swollen eyes and rolled her eyes at Roddy. "Why, did you bully the little girl?" "No, no," Natha hurriedly explained, but Roddy asked her to sit down. "Alright, she likes to bluff. Let me introduce you to everyone in our team." After a round of greetings, Natha was considered a member of this team. The dishes were served on the table. The atmosphere was relaxed, and Natha, who was a little nervous, relaxed a lot. After all, she did not have much contact with Kardashian in the past. In the face of so many dragons, she could only remain silent and not speak at all. Roddy knew her personality. After a few drinks, he said, "It was all thanks to Stika that Natha was injured. I have to thank him again." He toasted, then said, "Next, I plan to go to the place where Natha was attacked. There might be clues left behind by the High Elves in the new ruins. It also involves my previous plan for the Holy Assembly, the Sacred Congregation." Rubens suddenly understood. "Oh, I remember now. Those who claim to be descendants of the High Elves. They must have a lot of information on the High Elves. By the way, isn't Lady Edith a High Elf? I can't answer the Prime Minister's questions. I only know that there are some small towns outside Wagra City. It wouldn't be surprising if they still exist. However, I can't remember any towns or villages near the coordinates that Natha pointed out to me. Perhaps they only appeared after I fell asleep." Edith sat upright and answered. There was a glass of water in front of her, but it was just for show. Hearing her words, Rubens waved the knife and fork in his hand. "Then, I can help capture the people from the Holy Assembly and interrogate them. It would be considered a contribution to the paper, right?" Kardashian rubbed her forehead. "I really have to give it to you. You only know how to solve problems with violence. If it were so simple, would you even have the chance to capture them? Indeed, with the current ability of the Intelligence Bureau, it is still difficult to find the traces of the Holy Assembly. So, I thought of a way before." Rhodey continued her words and carefully explained the previous trap plan. He then said, "However, the appearance of the new ruins has disrupted my plans. So, I want to see what is inside the ruins first before I make any further plans." "Then let's go. I'm in. When are we going?" "It's not far anyway. Count me in. Is it an adventure? I haven't done it for a long time. What if I find the treasure?" Rubens, Eshen and Stika all agreed immediately. Iskar was even more enthusiastic. "Then can I bring the crystal cannon and test its power on the way?" Seeing that the dragons were so enthusiastic about exploring the ruins, Sally was relieved. She knew that she definitely could not leave the magic tower. If Roddy went, with the 5 dragons by his side, there might not be many people in this world who could pose a threat to him. Such a luxurious team also set off a huge wave in Natha's heart. Although Roddy looked like he was chatting casually, who knew how long this guy had been preparing for today's plan? He said that he was going to get back at them after being bullied. Now it seems that not only is he going to get back at them, I'm afraid that even a group of magisters will be crushed to pieces. Thinking of this, she felt a little sour in her eyes. She quickly lowered her head and drank some water to hide it. Of course it's not a problem to bring the crystal cannon. But now I'm worried about how to find the murderers who attacked Natha. If you fly directly as a dragon, I think this group of people will be scared away, and it will be difficult to track them. As soon as he finished speaking, Iskar immediately added, "That's easy. Didn't you say that many mercenary groups are looking for the ruins? Let's also pretend to be a mercenary group and explore it. Then, we'll wait for them to take the bait. What do you think?" "Hey, that's a good idea. Don't human bards always sing about this kind of story? Something about a mercenary group meeting a dragon in the forest, Then after a battle, they slayed the dragon and returned. Stika pushed him. Rubens, can you use your brain? Everyone burst into laughter as they watched the two dragons bicker with each other. They did not take tomorrow's operation seriously. After all, with 5 dragons, even 10 of the highest level bosses in the Silent Forest would not be enough to deal with them. It was normal for them to be so confident. At this time, Natha finally took the initiative to speak. Then, I'll be your guide tomorrow. Your body, it's already fine. Since I still remember the way, let me lead the way tomorrow. After saying that, Natha felt sweat on her forehead. After all, she was really anxious to interrupt Roddy in front of so many dragons. Sally wanted to speak, but Kardashian gave her a look, and the queen kept quiet. At first, Roddy wanted to let Nora go. However, seeing Nada's determination, he knew that she was stubborn. In the end, he nodded and said, "All right. Listen to my instructions and don't run around." Natha was relieved and quickly agreed. After the meal, Rubens continued to drag Stika and the others to the entertainment area. Roddy accompanied Sally to talk to Quio and Morales, which could be considered as checking on the effects of the treatment during this period. Only Natha returned to her own ICU. Edith brought her the routine potion. In fact, her body was indeed fine. These days were just an observation period, so it did not matter whether she drank the potion or not. However, Natha still drank the potion obediently. Edith took the cup and said, "Rest early. Don't stay up late." Natha did not know why she said that. Edith did not explain and left with a smile. After turning off the illumination circle, Natha, who was lying on the bed, found that she could not fall asleep. She closed her eyes and tried to relax, but after a while, she would stare at her hands in the dark with her eyes wide open. Then, she would roll back and forth in the quilt. She was used to loneliness, so this was the only way to express her inner joy. In the room upstairs, Roddy did not accompany the queen to rest early. Instead, he was frowning as he read the news that had just come from Aisha village today. Broodie's handwritten letter showed the recent strange events in the Forest of Silent Words, which puzzled him. Theory of bloodline? Isn't this the name of the Holy Assembly? Roddy crossed his arms and carefully thought about the meaning behind this. Sally took a sip of the milk warmed by the magic circle and leaned on the table. Many places have theories of bloodline. Some nobles only choose their heirs by marrying close relatives. The Holy Assembly is not the only one who does this. You're right. I'm a little too sensitive now. The Holy Assembly is still human. How can you tell that Camilla has high elf bloodline? Yes, she's beautiful. Sally's meaningful answer made Roddy feel a little helpless. He put the letter aside and changed the topic. Let's go to Aisha village tomorrow. I haven't been there for more than 2 years. Then, he picked up a few letters with special marks on them. What? You've also started to study prophecy? He was talking about the dreams recorded by Houdini. The prophecy magister had indeed shown Roddy the accuracy of certain aspects of the prophecy through several dream records. Although most of the content was abstract and vague, at least it wasn't made up. Now, every month, the Archmage would record 1 or 2 dreams. Some of the things matched up while others seemed illusory. Roddy simply asked him to record and systematically sort out the meaning of the things in the dream. This step had the meaning of dream analysis. However, what he could see at the moment was only fragmented fragment. After the cabinet dealt with the affairs, I'm finally free. I have to find something to do besides studying divine spells. I'm just going to look through it, Sally said as she stroked the viper Mogala, who was lying lazily on the table. Roddy, what do you think prophecy is based on? Is there a secret hint from the gods? If something is accurately predicted and it happens, will its occurrence have an element of being prophesied in it? This was a classic question that all prophets had to face. Roddy remembered that in the Middle Ages on Earth, there was a famous prophet who predicted that he would die on a certain day. After he lived to that day, he killed himself to prove the accuracy of his prophecy. This was a joke in modern times, but in this world it was not so funny. Chapter 964. I dreamt that a curtain of light fell from the sky and fell to the ground. The sky did not know day or night. There seemed to be a roar above the clouds, but it was too far away for me to see. The picture below was as abstract as ever. Roddy could tell that the magician was trying to describe the colors of the sky, but there was no precedent for such a scene. With his artistic skills, it was just barely satisfactory. But thinking of the strange phenomenon that had appeared around the moon, Roddy had to be sure. He did predict this, but what does it mean? Roar? There was no thunder. As he continued to read, Houdini added, light began to fall to the ground and spread. The dark ground turned silver. Someone was shouting something around me, but I could not hear them clearly. Dreams were always like this. What one saw and heard was often difficult to describe in word. Sally pointed at it. Is this related to the tide of magical power you mentioned before? The mana tide was a concept proposed by the dragons. Many people also thought that it was a key factor in the destruction of the High Elf. The mana tide referred to a period of time when the density of the elements suddenly decreased greatly, just like the ebb of the sea. This caused the power of the magicians in the world to decrease accordingly. The High Elves' magical civilization was powerful, but they were constantly losing against the demons and beastmen. The dragons did mention the phenomenon of the mana tide in this period of history, but the mana tide that Roddy knew did not affect the entire continent. It only appeared in a small area. As for how many times it happened, the dragons did not say. It's too vague. Maybe it has something to do with the moonlight that day. Roddy guessed for a long time, but he did not know. At this time, Sally had finished her milk and went to the bathroom in a loose nightgown to wash up. She held a toothbrush that was popular among the Cullen nobles. She tilted her head and said, "Who cares what it is? Wash up and go to bed, Prime Minister." "Yes, Your Majesty." Roddy stretched his body. Akasha was supposed to follow them on this mission, but Roddy eventually let her stay in the Dragon Tower. After all, when he, the Prime Minister, was not around, there must be someone he could absolutely trust as an eye to monitor everything. He went to the bedroom window. Hollier was covered in snow in the night. In the darkness in the distance, the Forest of Silence was as quiet as usual. The next morning, Chief Brody, who had been walking in the forest for a day, walked out of his tent. He looked up at the gloomy sky and sighed. I really have nothing better to do than to come out and suffer at this time of the year. Although he said that, the young wood elf next to him handed over the freshly cooked meat soup. Chief, you are after all thinking for them. It's snowing heavily this year. If you don't give them some supplies, I'm afraid these people will be in trouble. Broody was previously rejected when he went to Boddy's village, and his men were beaten up by Chief Atwood yesterday. Even so, he personally went out in this cold winter, and led a team to Megun village, which was relatively close to Urza village. He planned to exchange a dozen bags of food with the other party. Rather than saying it was an exchange, it was more like giving something to the other party. However, the Wood Elves also wanted to save face. Simply giving food would easily cause a strained relationship. Megun village was not far, but Broody persuaded Chief Frank for a long time to agree to open the trade route. The wealth of Urza village skyrocketed, and Megun village naturally benefited a lot because of its geographical advantage. In just one summer, the food problem in the village had been greatly improved, and the equipment of the hunting team had been changed. The last time he contacted Broody, Chief Frank still smiled and made an appointment with him for the next plan. However, in the past month, the other party had not sent anyone to Urza village to contact him. Even if he missed the appointment, Broody still hoped that the other party could explain things clearly in person. Atwood's clamoring about the bloodline theory had already made him feel a little strange. He did not want Megun village, which was the closest to Urza village, to cause any trouble, so he personally brought his team to visit. There were 25 people in the team. Because Urza village had raised the alert level after Broody reported the news, there were only 10 wood elves in this team, and the remaining 15 were elite soldiers of the Ifta infantry division. The well-equipped human soldiers made Broody feel much more at ease, but he did not want to rely on this kind of force when talking to Chief Frank. After silently drinking the meat soup, Broody signaled everyone to break camp and set off. However, not long after, the sentinel in front sent a strange message. There was a magical beast's corpse blocking the way. What corpse? Broody found it strange. Under normal circumstances, wasn't it normal for a large beast like an elk to die on the side of the road? Could it be that this human sentinel had entered the forest for the first time? It's very big, the scout gestured for a long time. In the end, Broody decided to go take a look himself. However, after walking for 200 meters, he was shocked by the corpse in front of him. It was a real earth dragon. There were a few existences at the top of the food chain in the silent forest. Earth dragons were elusive and usually did not appear on the surface. However, once this thing appeared, it would definitely mean a disaster. Its body was more than 10 meters long. As it was considered a mutated subdragon, its body was like a wingless dragon's, but its head was much uglier. Its long spiral horns were like those of a goat, and it looked abnormally out of place. This thing weighed at least 7 to 8 tons, and the scales and carapace on its body had amazing defense. If it attacked Urza village, Broody reckoned that the entire village would be easily defeated by it. Perhaps only the weapons of the infantry division could pose a threat to it. However, the problem at hand was, such a powerful creature had actually died in the middle of the small road leading to Megang village. As the saying goes, a tiger dies but never falls. Even though the earth dragon in front of him was dead, no magical beast dared to come forward and eat the corpse. Coupled with the cold temperature, Broody took a closer look and found that the corpse was almost in the same state when it was killed. The middle of its body had been blown apart by a strange force, and its abdominal cavity and bones were exposed. It had obviously died on the spot before it could escape. A mage, Broody was considered to be one of the more knowledgeable people in the village. A mage who could directly blow up an earth dragon was no different from a god to the wood elves. So, why did such a being kill an earth dragon? After a round of inspection, the skin, flesh, tendons, and bones of the earth dragon were all intact. The only thing missing was the magic crystal. Logically speaking, after killing such a powerful magical beast, all the usable materials should be taken away. When Roddy killed the giant dragon Vissam, it took him a lot of effort just to dispose of the corpse. However, the materials obtained in the end were used to arm the cavalry, and the effect was obvious. Apart from the magic crystal and the wounds on its body, this earth dragon was undamaged. No matter how he looked at it, something was wrong. Broody judged that this thing should have been killed 2 days ago. He circled the earth dragon for a long time, but finally waved his hand. Let's go back to the village. Village chief. The other wood elves were puzzled. They had been in contact with humans for a long time now, and knew that the tendons, bones, and skin of this magical beast could be sold for a lot of money. However, Broody did not explain at all. He just continued to say, "Stop looking. Pack up and go back." The accompanying human soldiers only followed the order. They had been vigilantly observing the surroundings, but nothing happened until Broody left with his team. Broody was preoccupied and did not say anything on the way back. The few wood elves who came with him were discussing, but he stopped them with a look. Behind them, a group of wood elves hidden in the forest watched Broody and the others leave. The leader was Frank, the village chief of Megaon village. After seeing Broody go far away, he heaved a sigh of relief and said to his companions, "Let's go. This way we can report on our mission." Chapter 965. When night fell, Panda and the others began to set up camp to rest. The weather was clear and there was no snow in the sky. The bright moon could be seen. Panda, who had entered the forest of silence, had a serious expression on his face as he continuously threw branches into the bonfire in front of him. Although the dancing flames warmed his body, the atmosphere in the group was much colder than when they first set off. This was naturally because of the miracle that the moon had displayed a few days ago. There were 4 arcanists, 8 arcane warriors, and 15 members of the Holy Assembly who were quite skilled. This small mercenary group could be said to have everything: melee, ranged, and magicians. But the ridiculous thing was, they suddenly realized that they were no longer arcanists. The Holy Lord wants us to forget about our past. So, Denzel, the next time you light a bonfire, don't use arcane spells. Panda's voice sounded tired. The arcanist who was busy preparing dinner nodded. Yes, my lord. After saying that, he hesitated. But then we can only use the fire sickle to slowly light a fire. That will be more troublesome, so be it. It's better than losing our lives. After saying that, Panda turned to look at his 2 pale arcanist companions. Are you feeling better? However, they shook their heads and turned to look at the arcanist who was lying beside the bonfire. My lord, what about Corey? One of them struggled to support his body, and also picked up some firewood to throw into the bonfire. However, after saying that, he covered his mouth and coughed violently. When he removed his hand, the bright red blood on his palm was shocking. This was not caused by the attack of the magical beasts, but the impact of the miracle on the arcanist's cognition. Like Blake, when they found out that the miracle was real, they began to doubt and waver in the arcane spells they had been studying for a long time. The change in the foundation of their power had even caused damage to their bodies. Although their bodies had recovered a little, they were dispirited and looked as if they had been seriously ill. Their combat strength had obviously been reduced by half. This made Panda, who was also not in a good state, anxious. This was because Holy Lord Blake had just sent someone to catch up with his team yesterday and gave them a series of instructions. This meant that he could not even give up on the mission now. He could only continue according to the method that Holy Lord Blake had said and find the ruins. Remember the words that the Lord Saint specifically told us. We have to give up the past from the bottom of our hearts and embrace everything before us. Only then will we be able to obtain salvation from the calamity. As Panda spoke, he felt awkward. Arcanists hated charlatans the most, but now, he had become the one they hated the most. He glanced at the people in front of him, including the Arcana warriors who were cooking. Everyone had helpless and even aggrieved expressions on their faces. They were only a little more than a day away from their destination. According to Ludi's intelligence, they would not only have to be wary of magical beasts in another 30 kilometers, but they would also have to be wary of powerful magic casters who could come and go without a trace. In order to deal with possible enemies, Panda and the others had made ample preparations. They had brought all kinds of scrolls, and at the same time there were tools, potions, and various consumables that were specially used for magical battles. At the same time, under their seemingly ragged linen coats, they were all fine robes and armor that were inlaid with crystals. This small team could be said to be armed to the teeth, but on the surface, they deliberately created the illusion of a third-rate mercenary group. It was also thanks to this effort, coupled with the necklaces that were personally made by Holy Lord Blake, that Panda and the others, who were constantly praying and chanting along the way, did not attract the attention of the Intelligence Bureau. In this regard, Blake had indeed made a clever move. However, although Panda and the others had gotten past the surveillance of the Intelligence Bureau, they could not escape the gaze of the gods. After dinner, the symptoms of one of the arcanists named Corey became more and more serious. He vomited all the meat soup that he had eaten for dinner, and his consciousness became hazy, Panda held the Arcanist who had been joking with them a few days ago in his arms, gritted his teeth, and said in a low voice, "Corey, don't be stubborn, you have to believe in her existence. Don't doubt and resist anymore. If you continue like this, you will die." I can't understand. Even if you can't understand, you have to understand. What you see is true, and we have all seen it. Why do you still tell yourself that it is fake? Panda tried his best to persuade him to believe in the existence of the moon god, but how could the concept that the Holy Assembly had instilled in him for so many years be changed so easily? In comparison, Blake and Panda were more adaptable, and for the sake of survival and goals, they could give up anything. However, most of the Arcanists who had studied Arcana since they were young, and considered themselves to be the purest descendants of the High Elves, could not allow themselves to become a fraud. This was equivalent to denying their entire life's belief. Arcanist Corey kept shaking his head, his face becoming paler and paler, and his breath weaker and weaker. No matter how much Panda tried to persuade him, he was ultimately unable to change his atheistic point of view. Finally, at midnight, Corey glared angrily and suddenly shouted, "All gods are lies." After that, his body trembled, and his whole body slumped down, and there was no more sound. Panda clenched his fists tightly, watching the scene unfold in front of him, but there was nothing he could do. After 2 seconds, he fiercely smashed his magic staff on the ground, and because of the sudden feeling of helplessness, he covered his face and cried bitterly. The bright moon above his head was still emitting a gentle light, but Panda felt that it was dazzling. He understood that these people were all followers of the moon god. They recited prayers, presided over sacrifices, and held ceremonies. Fundamentally speaking, they were already considered to be standard clergymen. Corey's death had a serious conflict with the power given to him by the gods and his thoughts. His brain was unable to accept it, and the result was that his body was unable to withstand the conflict of power, which led to his death. They had come out to carry out a mission, and not only had they not met a single enemy, but their comrade had died because of such a thing. The morale of the entire team had fallen to the bottom. Panda cried bitterly in the snow, but when he tried to wipe away his tears, he suddenly stood up, and with a crack, he stepped on his most beloved magic staff and broke it. Everyone in the camp stood up. They had been together for a long time, and they all knew how much Panda cherished that magic staff. But seeing this scene, they all realized the seriousness of the problem. "In the name of the captain, I order you all to throw away all things related to Arcanists and destroy them." Panda lowered his head with a pained expression, and then, "Forget them." No one objected, and the Arcanists and arcane warriors began to take out their magic tools one by one. Many people's eyes were red as they placed these tools at their feet, and clenched their teeth as they destroyed them into pieces. Although they were just tools, they also represented their life's belief. The feeling of having one's life's beliefs trampled under one's feet was not a good one for anyone. Some people could not help but cry out, but Panda rushed forward and slapped them, as if he had lost control, and roared, "What are you crying for? That is already the past. We are now the most devout followers of the moon god." He shouted until his voice was hoarse, but there were also 2 lines of tears on his face. His companion, whose face was red from the slap, bit his lip, but in the end did not refute at all, and tore his own magic robe into pieces. The light of the bonfire rose higher and higher. This was because they had thrown in all the things that could be burned. Panda took a deep breath, trying to make his voice calm. "We have already bid farewell to the past. Now pray with me to the great moon god, Styrian." He turned around and knelt down to the moon, loudly chanting a prayer. The people in the campsite followed suit. No matter what their previous attitude towards the moon god was, at this moment their posture was uniform. And just as the prayer was about to end, a sudden surge of power from within his body caused Panda's eyes to widen in surprise. He turned his head to look at his companions, and everyone felt the mysterious power that was different from arcane magic. Looking down, the moon pendants hanging in front of their chests were emitting a bright luster. The fatigue in his body was dispelled, and the abundant energy made Panda completely forget about the cold around him. He raised his hand, pressed it on the bare trunk of a tree beside him, and then slowly closed his eyes. In an instant, the withered tree's branches and leaves flourished, and flowers bloomed. Then, ripe fruits grew from small to large, and when they were ripe, they fell to the ground with a crackling sound. From now on there will be no more arcanists. Chapter 966. If you can't do it well, then do it again, until you succeed. Losers deserve to suffer, understand? Village Chief Barty shouted at the wood elves in front of him, who were practicing spellcasting with magic crystals in their hands. Just as he finished speaking, a nearby wood elf failed to cast a spell due to a lack of concentration. Barty saw this, and without a word, he stepped forward and kicked the wood elf. Thud! The thin wood elf was kicked in the chest. He fell on the ground and couldn't get up for a long time. I've taught you so many times, but you still can't learn it. Do you even have a brain? Chief Barty's expression was very fierce. He stood in front of the wood elf and bent down to poke his chest with his finger. If I see you fail again, your head will be blown off by the magic crystal, understand? Yes, I understand. The wood elf who was kicked down was very thin. He was only 17 years old. Due to the lack of resources and the long-term food shortage, his body was as thin as a bamboo pole. However, Chief Barty didn't hold back when he scolded and threatened him. When he stood up again, the thin wood elf suppressed the fear in his heart. He held the magic crystal and began to cast a spell step by step according to the steps that Barty had taught him. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain of the energy eroding his body. Finally, he released a ray of light. Amidst the explosion, Chief Barty nodded and continued to patrol. The atmosphere of the village had changed rapidly in the past month. Compared to humans, the wood elves were more conservative and peaceful. Their good temper was not an exception but the norm. But now, the village was full of shouting and cursing. Not only Chief Barty, but the wood elves from other villages who came here to learn also began to become hostile. After every practice, the wood elves from different villages would often fight each other to get a mouthful of meat soup. At this time, they didn't have a magic crystal, so they couldn't cast any spells. They could only rely on their fists to determine the winner. At first, it was just pushing and shoving. Later, it escalated to shouting and fighting. Now, before every meal, they would use all their strength to knock each other to the ground. Quarrels had become a common occurrence during the intervals of magic training, and they would occasionally escalate into group fights. However, Barty did not try to stop them. Instead, he seemed to be encouraging them. In his words, in the face of the most ferocious enemy, only one's own strength was the most reliable. The will to fight could never be given by others. Courage is your confidence in your own strength. Yes. After the lecture, the group slowly left the open space. Barty, who was standing in the same place, took a deep breath. The elemental power of the magic crystal made him feel intoxicated. When he opened his eyes, the colors of the world seemed to have changed. Rubbing the green crystal in his palm, he strolled to the front of his treehouse. At this time, this was no longer a simple residence. In front of the treehouse, there was a simple straw shed that he had specially built with tree trunk. This was actually his laboratory. Although compared with Elson's laboratory, this did not prevent Barty from being happy with his result. The books brought back from the ruins were placed here one by one. There were too many things left there, and only the most important ones were moved here. These days, he had sent people to keep an eye on the ruins. All the teams that found and went in were attacked and destroyed without exception. This fact made him more and more aware of how powerful the power he had come into contact with was. At this time, Body opened one of the books and continued to make the magic circle according to the pattern drawn on it. There were no special tools here. It could even be said that it was not as simple as a blacksmith's shop. However, Body had never seen those things. All his knowledge of the power in front of him came from these books and note. Because of this, Body had this kind of perseverance and confidence that ordinary people could not understand. The magic circle that Body was drawing now was very powerful. If something went wrong after he inlaid the magic crystal, the consequences would definitely be that he and the wooden house would be blown up into the sky. However, Body, who had come from an unorthodox background, was not a fool. He knew that his control and understanding of the magic circle was not good enough. Therefore, he only drew and did not inlay any magic crystal. One day, when I have obtained enough resources, the control of most of the wood elf villages had given birth to ambitions that Chief Body had never had before. With those thoughts in mind, Body's hands continued to draw the formation over and over again. Every time he redrew it, the accuracy would increase, but he was not satisfied. He checked the complicated formation in the book over and over again, looking for flaws. Body himself did not understand the order in which the formation should be drawn, nor did he know how the depth of the formation would affect the formation, but that did not stop him from persisting in his thoughts. On the other side of the field, when the wood elves were fighting again, a wood elf wearing a leather coat suddenly came to Body's side and said in a low voice, "Frank said that Brody went back halfway, these cowards." Body narrowed his eyes. "But sooner or later, we will let those degenerates know what they have done wrong. Your fruit is not bad. Of course, there are not many bowly fruits to eat in this weather. Lord Randolph, please take one and try it." "This is not appropriate." "What is inappropriate about it?" "Take it, take it." After receiving a blue fruit from the peddler, the wood elf Randolph continued to walk forward in a wobbly manner. The temperature was below 0, but the fruit did not freeze. He took a bite, and the sweet and sour taste mixed with the crisp texture made him close his eyes in comfort. In the past, not to mention fruits, there were not even a few vegetables in this season. Compared to the winter of the past 20 years, this was simply unimaginable. Just as he was about to find an excuse to go to the next stall to swindle some benefits, his gaze suddenly focused and he quickened his steps. "Natha? Are you all right?" Natha was not wearing the fur from before. Instead, she was wearing plain leather armor that was similar to the one she wore when she left the village 2 years ago. In order to keep warm, she wore a thick cloak. This made her not as distant as before. Randolph's heart was stirred again. "I heard that you were badly injured. How are you now?" "I'm fine." Natha was still expressionless. She immediately changed the topic. "Is Village Chief Brody around?" "He is." "Are you going to look for him?" "Let me go with you." Randolph was unusually attentive and took out another small wild fruit from his pocket. "It's fresh. Try it." "I won't eat it, thank you." Natha waved her hand and refused. "I'm not looking for him." She then looked behind her, and Randolph's eyes followed her curiously. Then, his expression froze on his face. He wanted to say something, but he quickly shut up because of Roddy's shush gesture. "Long time no see, Randolph." Roddy greeted politely. As the current leader of the Kingdom of Karen, he did not wear any luxurious clothes. Just like Natha, he wore a cloak and a leather armor. The only difference was that his leather boots were not as muddy as the other mercenaries and merchants. They were as clean as if they were newly bought. Randolph felt as though his throat was being strangled. Compared to 2 years ago, Roddy's appearance did not change much. However, his calm gaze and attitude brought great pressure to others because of his current identity. Thinking about how the entire territory of the Kingdom of Karen was under this person's control, Randolph could not help but feel his legs turn to jelly. Originally, the wood elves would not be like this, but after interacting with humans for a long time, the suppression brought by the difference in class had begun to affect Randolph's thinking. Therefore, his posture of bowing to greet Roddy was a little exaggerated. My lord, if you are looking for the village chief, I can lead the way. Sorry to trouble you. Chapter 967. Your hat is so silly. You look like a refugee. You're the silly one. I've never seen anyone wearing a green hat. It's winter now. Even if you want to disguise yourself, you should at least wear a white one, okay? Rubens and Sticka had become the talkative kings of the team. They could bicker with each other no matter where they went. In order to help Roddy investigate the ruins, they specially went to the market in Hollier City to buy their outfits. Compared to the clothes that the dragons were wearing, their current equipment was very rustic, which caused them to constantly complain about each other's aesthetic standards. Eshen, where did you buy this sheepskin coat? It looks very warm. Rubens turned the topic to the tall and taciturn Eshen. The latter pointed to the market on the other side of Elsa's village. Rubens' eyes lit up. He turned his head and said, Roddy, I'll go and have a look. Go ahead. Go ahead and do whatever you want. We'll meet at the entrance of the village in half an hour. Roddy waved his hand. I'll go and find the village chief first. You guys go ahead. Kardashian was dressed in a sorcerer's outfit, which was similar to her usual clothes. As an ice dragon, she could not feel the cold at all. But in order not to expose herself, she still wore a thick cloak and hood. Iskar, on the other hand, was immersed in his role. He carried an exaggeratedly large backpack, and was rubbing his hands like a passer-by. He asked in a trembling voice, Why don't we go to the tavern first? Natha inexplicably wanted to laugh. Kardashian rolled her eyes. Do you really think this is a stage play? Sticka was dragged to the market by Rubens to choose a hat. The remaining 4 people followed Natha to the tavern. At this time, Randolph and Roddy had already walked far away. He kept looking back. He felt that this group of people gave him a strange feeling. Looking at Roddy's calm face, he could not help but ask, Prime Minister, are they mercenaries that you hired? Although they were mercenaries, this group of people really did not know any manners. Not only did they directly call the Prime Minister by his name, but they were also all smiling mischievously. Roddy didn't seem to mind and casually said, Yes, a few mercenary friends. He did not explain further, and Randolph did not ask further. With the strength of this wood elf, he really couldn't sense how strong those mercenaries were. After staying in the market for a long time, Randolph had dealt with all kinds of people. The valiant aura of mercenaries was very obvious. They were in the business of killing, and the smell of blood was very easy to detect. But these guys, could it be that they were new to the industry? While he was thinking, the door of the village chief's wooden house was already in front of him. Randolph stopped moving forward and consciously lagged behind. Lord Roddy is here. Okay, thank you. He was very polite to Randolph. After knocking on the door, a haggard Brody came to open the door. After seeing Roddy for a few seconds, he rubbed his eyes and immediately bowed. Prime Minister, Roddy immediately held him. Shoo, it's a secret. Brody immediately nodded and did not say anything. After letting Roddy enter the house, he quickly closed the door. After entering the house, Roddy did not put on any airs. He sat in front of the fire and talked with the Wood Elf village chief about the recent events. Seeing his worried face, Roddy asked, Is the situation very bad? At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just a few village chiefs throwing a tantrum with me. But in a short period of a month, almost all the Wood Elf villages have cut off contact with us. This is definitely not an isolated incident. I suspect it was done by body, but I don't have any evidence. I want to search, but... He did not avoid the topic and told the truth. A few days ago, I went to find Frank and encountered a dead earth dragon on the way. It was obviously a warning with force. I don't think Urza's current forces can deal with the earth dragon, so I didn't dare to continue. Roddy listened to his narration and found it strange. They killed the Earth Dragon, but they didn't take anything except the magic crystal. They only left the corpse there to warn you? Prime Minister, I think this might be a helpless warning from Frank. Brody continued, just yesterday we found similar corpses on the road to the other two villages. They were all killed by the explosion and blocked the road. If they really had a falling out with me, they could have just sent someone to tell me. Why did they have to do this? I know the temperament of those old fellows. They are not cruel and callous people. Suddenly doing this, perhaps they have their own difficulties that they can't speak of. Roddy did not know the other village chiefs, so he could only accept Brody's explanation. However, the situation in Urza village was obviously a little strange. Apart from this place, all the other wood elf villages in the Forest of Silence had been cut off. He thought for a moment and said to Brody, "Don't go anywhere for now. Implement a curfew at night. Remember to be careful." Brody nodded vigorously. He would carry out Roddy's words 100% now. "Then, if you need my help, sir, just let me know." Back then, Brody could still address Roddy directly by his name, but now he had the standard attitude of a subordinate. Roddy knew that this was unavoidable, so he did not act humble. He stood up and replied, "Urza village is developing well like this. I will go to the forest with a few friends. Just don't tell anyone who I am." With that, he left. However, Roddy did not immediately go to the entrance of the village to find Kardashian and the others. Instead, he pulled up his hood and went alone to the sentry post outside the village. The soldiers here were a little surprised to see Roddy because his face often appeared in Cullen's era. However, the soldiers of Urza village did not believe that the Prime Minister would come to such a remote place. Roddy did not waste time. He took out an emblem and a piece of paper. Check. The soldiers on the sentry immediately saluted. After receiving the items, he took out a small magic circle and placed the emblem on it to confirm his identity. At the same time, the captain of the sentry post, who could read, was called over. After seeing the contents of the paper, his expression changed greatly. He stood at attention and said, "Prime Minister, I won't ask you to join the battle, but I need to take a few things," he explained, and the soldier immediately understood. He dug out a metal tube that was about 1/2 meter long from the sentry post. Roddy took it and weighed it. "Are there any more here?" "Prime Minister, we have been checking them every day since we started distributing them last month. There are more than 4 in reserve." The soldier's answer satisfied Roddy. He carefully checked the integrity of the magic circle on the tube, and then hung it on the side of the quiver on his back. After leaving the sentry post, Roddy arrived at the entrance of the village on time. He found that Kardashian and the others were already waiting there. Sticka had finally changed his green hat and was arguing with Rubens about whether a sword or a knife was better. The others listened helplessly. Seeing Roddy coming over, Kardashian immediately showed a relieved look. "Let's go. If I listen to them anymore, I can't help but beat them up." Roddy hurriedly arranged the task. "Natha, lead the way to the place where we were attacked. We will try to find it before dark. If we are attacked halfway, then let's let them experience what despair is." Rubens waved the knife in his hand and made a pose as if he was singing an opera. Roddy felt that this guy was really stupid. He said helplessly, "I mean, after being attacked, there is no hurry to destroy the other party. Our goal is to find out the identity of the attacker, so we should capture them alive. If we encounter other mercenary groups..." Seeing that Rubens was about to speak again, Sticka pressed him back. "Will it kill you to talk less nonsense?" Natha's shoulders twitched, and she held back her laughter. Roddy coughed. "Sticka is the most sensitive in the forest. It will be best if he can find the ruins. If he can't, the information of other mercenary groups is also very important. But, if they are malicious, then we will deal with them accordingly." "That's right. My long saber is already thirsting for blood." Rubens chuckled and strode out of the village with a relaxed expression. After a few steps, he found that the others were led by Natha in another direction. So he could only trot awkwardly to catch up with the team. Chapter 968. Crack. The sound of twigs snapping was the main melody of the journey in the forest. Panda breathed in the cold air and tried to look forward, calculating the direction in his mind. Priest Panda, priest. The people who were originally arcanists were now trying to adapt to the new way of addressing each other. We should be close, right? The margin of error is not more than 2 kilometers. Everyone, stay alert. The team was already in a state of preparation, and now everyone was even more nervous as they picked up their weapons. Their current situation was very awkward. If it was based on the levels of arcane warriors and arcanists, the strength of this team could absolutely crush most of the other mercenary teams in the forest. Even if they encountered high-level magical beasts, they would still have the power to fight. However, the strange encounter forced them to abandon the arcane system. This made everyone feel like their martial arts had been crippled. Especially the remaining 3 arcanists. They were originally stronger than high-level mages, and Panda was even comparable to a magus. This group of people could be said to be able to summon the wind and summon the rain wherever they went, but now they had to start all over again. The powerful warriors who used to fight with arcane shields had now switched to divine spells. Even their fighting style had changed. Although the divine spells were not weak, the power bestowed by the moon god did not seem to be good at fighting head-on. Panda knew this, so he did not rush. Instead, he patiently led the team to find a few magical beasts that were not very strong and used hunting to let the team get used to the new power in their bodies as soon as possible. This method was indeed effective. At first, he even had the thought of giving up on the mission, but now it seemed that after several times of getting used to each other, their combat strength was not much worse than before. It was just that their style had changed a lot. In the name of Styrian, bestow pure power upon your people. Every time Panda walked a certain distance, he would cast a blessing on the people in front of him. He did not even know the specific name of this skill, because it was purely an effect achieved through incantations and prayers. After casting, the senses of the soldiers who were scouting the way would be several times sharper. With this skill in the forest, the ability to avoid danger could be said to be greatly improved. However, at this moment, one of the scouts suddenly straightened his body. "There's movement in front." The team instantly stopped. No one else heard anything, but when they looked forward, they saw a faint flash of light at the end of the fog-filled horizon. The sound of all kinds of weapons being unsheathed could be heard. Panda narrowed his eyes and immediately made a decision. "Priests, cast your blessings together. Everyone, push forward and prepare for battle." Many days of preparation had been for this moment. They were all elites of the Holy Assembly, and not new recruits on the battlefield for the first time. Thus, the team's atmosphere was still calm as they slowly advanced toward the spot where the light had appeared a few hundred meters away. During this process, the noise in the distance gradually became louder and louder. At first, it was just a crackling sound, and then there was a more powerful muffled sound. Then, they saw a towering tree fall to the ground. Panda squinted his eyes, holding the necklace that represented the moon god in his hand. He silently chanted a prayer. As the priests cast their divine spells, a faint light appeared on everyone's body. The whole team was surrounded by a faint layer of silver light, but because it was daytime, it was not clear. The soldiers with bows and arrows put on leather finger guards and nocked long arrows. When the scene of the fierce battle gradually appeared in front of them, everyone showed a look of shock. There were 2 groups of people fighting in front of them. One group was obviously a mercenary team that came to explore. There were around 30 people, but there were currently only a dozen of them fighting. Many of them were lying on the ground, and for a moment it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. This group of mercenaries was obviously not weak. They had a clear division of labor. The archers who used bows and arrows to counterattack were constantly rolling between the giant trees to avoid the attacks. Their shooting speed was abnormally fast, and the enchanted red light on the arrows could be seen. Among them were 2 elementalists who stood behind the shield and kept casting spells. It was because of these 2 pillars that the mercenary team did not collapse under the enemy's bombardment. On the other side, a dozen figures in ragged clothes held glowing stones in their hands. In the process of dodging arrows and magic, they kept casting unknown spells. Although Panda and the others used to study arcane magic, they had a very deep understanding of elemental spells. But what surprised them was, the group of beggars in front of them looked like they were casting spells, but in fact there were not many elemental fluctuations in their bodies. They were completely using the magic crystal in their hands as a source of energy to fight. But anyone with a little knowledge of magic would know that this group of people was digging their own grave. Magic crystal itself was a stable aggregation of a large amount of energy. Once the surface of the magic crystal was damaged, the energy would surge out like a flood, and the only result would be an explosion. Magic crystal must be guided by a magic circle, and the speed of energy dissipation must be controlled. But this group of people did not look like they had a magic circle. Their behavior, in the eyes of Panda and the others, was completely playing with their lives. This group of lunatics, if they use the magic crystal like this, they might even blow up this place. The arcane warriors also understood this point, and while cursing in their hearts, they protected the 4 priests. But Panda thought of the name that Lord Blake mentioned, One-Armed Sumi. The other party was a genius who could stack up 16 magic crystal. For a conservative arcanist like Sumi, directly using the magic crystal did not seem to be something that was out of reach. He immediately realized that he might have met the target he was looking for. Distract the group of mages from the side, those guys with the magic crystal. Find cover to avoid the elemental bombardment. We will help the mercenary team, but do not expose our backs to them. Panda's order stunned everyone for a moment. Because, according to their style in the past, the right way to go was to directly target everyone in front of them. But then most of them realized that now that they no longer had arcane magic, they would definitely suffer heavy losses if they made enemies on both sides. Once the order was given, the soldiers at the front immediately fired a wave of arrows. The group of mages who were constantly casting spells obviously did not expect someone to attack from the side. They were not trained mages, so they did not cast shields on both sides during the battle. Immediately, 2 of them screamed and fell to the ground, and the continuous explosions also stopped. Originally, the 2 mages in the mercenary team did not have the time to cast spells to counterattack, and they had been painstakingly protecting their own people with shields. Now that Panda and the others joined in, the pressure on these 2 people was greatly reduced, and they could finally cast spells to counterattack. And when 2 fireballs were cast, the originally passive situation was finally reversed. Panda's subordinates were all powerful people, not to mention their own strength and speed. In the face of such a complicated battlefield, combat literacy was actually more important. They were not afraid of the whistling spells, and quickly found suitable cover, and began to attack from all angles. In the team, there were 6 people who used bows and arrows, 2 of the arcane warriors carried powerful crossbows, and the rest used short spears. With such a sudden appearance of mid-range and long-range firepower, it immediately made the originally aggressive enemies completely speechless. The mercenary team completely let out a sigh of relief, and when the archers on this side began to counterattack, the group of figures in tattered robes finally could not hold on any longer and began to quickly retreat. They shouted something to each other, and immediately after that, 4 to 5 flashing magic crystal were thrown out. The people who were continuously shooting arrows immediately realized the danger, and all of them used all their skills to dodge and block. Panda pushed his hands forward, and a faint silver light appeared in front of the members of the Holy Assembly. The two mages also threw out their trump cards, and at the same time, directly fell to the ground. Boom, boom, boom. Unsurprisingly, the thrown magic crystal caused a chain explosion due to the uneven energy dissipation, and the violent impact swept across the battlefield. The base of two large trees was blown off, and they began to tilt to one side. In the midst of the crashing sounds, countless snow on the branches fell, and the entire battlefield was covered in a vast expanse of white. Chapter 969. Take a team and guard that side. Report back if there's anything. Yes, Lord Priest. One of the arcane warriors replied and led his team over. In this short battle, Panda's team, as the ambushers, suffered almost no losses. This was because the enemies were in such a hurry that they didn't have time to retaliate against the moon god believers. The well-trained soldiers walked out from behind the trees and lined up in front of Panda with their weapons. They were obviously going to negotiate with the mercenary group in front of them. The two elementalists quickly formed a small team of 8 and stood 10 meters away from Panda. Although they had just fought side by side, unfamiliar mercenary groups in the forest often needed to be wary of each other. After all, it wasn't uncommon for mercenary groups to kill each other and rob each other. After exchanging names with the other party, Panda went straight to the point. My mercenary group was attacked here before, and only one person escaped. Now I'm here for revenge and to take what I want. Seeing those guys, I can confirm that they are the enemies I'm looking for. The intermediate elementalist on this side was called Lewis. His equipment was obviously not ordinary. Otherwise, he would not have lasted so long under such a sudden attack. After hearing Panda's words, he nodded and said, "We're here for a mission. Now that we were attacked before we could complete the mission, we have to retreat. We, the Ice Fist mercenary group, will not forget your help. If you need gold or resources, we will agree." Panda waved his hand and did not beat around the bush. To be honest, I want to find the enemy who killed my men. Secondly, I want to explore a ruin. When he saw the elementalist's expression stiffen, he knew that the other party definitely had the same goal. Logically speaking, no one would say what their team was going to do during their first meeting. Panda had no choice but to probe. He knew very well that with his current team, it would be very difficult to deal with those enemies just now. Without arcane spells, the team's attack power was greatly reduced. Divine spells were more of a support type. They were strong in defense and recovery, but not offense. If they wanted to use their combat power, they had to have enough people. It would be fine if there were only 10 enemies, but what if there were 20 or 30? What if they were ambushed? He definitely wouldn't be able to escape. In order to complete the mission that Blake had given him, he immediately came up with several plans in his mind. The most suitable one was to hire this team of mercenaries with decent strength. I am Panda, a high priest of the moon god sect. The enemy just now was a bit strange. May I know the price to hire the Ice Fist mercenary band? Can we hire them now? To put it bluntly, the so-called mercenaries were people who worked for money. They didn't have any background attributes, so there was no problem of opposing each other. The vice-captain obviously couldn't make the decision. He turned around and asked the injured captain. The latter quickly replied, "Yes." In fact, the Ice Fist mercenary group was one of the more powerful mercenary groups in the Kingdom of Karen. They had left the initial stage and became a collective organization with its own sphere of influence and business network. Therefore, most of the time, mercenary groups didn't go on missions for certain employers, but for missions arranged by the mercenary group's higher-up. Their exploration this time was arranged by the leader of the mercenary group. and the content of their mission was to find new ruins in the silent forest and bring back things that could be sold for money. The concept was very vague, and there was no rule about how much loot they should bring back. Therefore, after a short consideration, the injured captain immediately expressed his willingness to be hired and gave a suitable price. The only additional requirement was that they could bring back 3 items from the ruins. If we can really find the ruins, we only need to bring back 3 items. The elementalist Lewis conveyed the captain's words. In his heart, he also preferred to cooperate rather than be on guard against each other. After all, the group of enemies that they encountered just now was fierce and came and went without a trace. Only by helping each other could they increase their chances of survival. No problem. Let's sign the contract. On the battlefield where the smoke and snow had yet to dissipate, Panda quickly signed the contract with the other party and paid 50 gold coins on the spot. After that, it was time to clean up the battlefield and count the casualties. This mercenary group had 4 mercenaries who were killed in the battle just now, and there were 8 wounded soldiers of varying degrees. In addition, there were 18 people who could fight, including 2 elementalists. Since the contract was signed, Panda immediately ordered the priests to start healing them with magic. He also personally went into battle and cast magic on the captain of this mercenary group, DeWitt. The power from the goddess of moon was gentle and powerful. The wounded soldiers who received treatment almost immediately recovered. Captain DeWitt, whose armor was blown up, looked at his abdomen in disbelief. A piece of wood was inserted there before, and when it was pulled out, the blood couldn't stop. But with the help of Panda, there was only a shallow scar left. Goddess Sky, I thought only the bishop of the Holy Cathedral could do this. As a swordsman, Captain DeWitt sighed again and again. The kingdom of Karen generally had a higher recognition of the Rose Cross religion. Panda smiled after hearing this. The light of the moon god Styrian shines on the earth. He just showed his existence before, didn't you notice it? Priest Panda, you mean the moon that day? DeWitt's eyes widened, and the people of the Ice Fist mercenary group around him also looked at each other. Miracle was very far away for people. Although the Rose Cross had many believers, it had been many years since the God of Light had any sense of existence on the continent. In contrast, the impact of the Moon God clan was obviously more convincing. Seeing these mercenary groups quickly believe in the Moon God clan, Panda's tense nerves finally relaxed. After that, during the inspection of the peripheral battlefield, they found 2 enemy corpses. After taking off the tattered robes, everyone could recognize that they were 2 thin, young wood elves. And such a discovery made Panda and DeWitt fall into deep thought. No wonder Urza village issued a notice not to let the caravan visit other villages. So these guys attack human beings? While DeWitt was puzzled, Panda squatted down and took out the magic crystal that had exhausted its energy from the corpse's clenched hand. What did they do? About 20 kilometers away from Panda and others, Natha had led this super-luxurious mercenary group to the place where she was attacked. When moving in the forest, Kardashian and others directly used magic power to fly instead of shapeshifting. This was because they needed to suppress their dragon's aura at all times. Otherwise, if they simply flew, the surrounding animals would be thrown away, which was obviously unnecessary. The smell of magic has disappeared, but the stench is still very strong. Iskar looked around with a serious expression. Rubens and Stika, on the other hand, were like tourists. They swayed left and right, kicked the corpse fragments with their feet, or stretched out their hands to break the branches of the trees. Eshin carefully cast an illusion enchantment around, so that they could not be seen from afar. It seems that something else has been here. Kardashian raised her hand and all the snow on the battlefield melted, so that the clues could be seen at a glance. But after a glance, she made a judgment. After all, we are in the forest. Roddy sighed because the corpses of the mercenaries in front of them had obviously been eaten by wild beasts. In the natural world, in winter, Animals would not let go of any opportunity to store food. Therefore, they could see that the ground was littered with torn clothes and pieces of armor. The corpses that had their stomachs cut open basically only had the hardest bones left. The limbs, internal organs, and heads had long been picked up somewhere. Natha looked at this tragic scene in a daze. If Nora did not find her, perhaps she would also end up in pieces in the silent forest. Natha, where did you find the fragments? Chapter 970. There's nothing in there, but there's something suspicious here. Kardashian pointed at the ground, and a lot of scattered debris floated up. Roddy took a look and found that they were all rock. It was difficult to put them together. It seemed that they were completely destroyed in the explosion. This should be the footprints of the attacker. Eshin used a spell to make the shallow pit on the ground more obvious. The dragons had amazing insight. Finding clues was a piece of cake for them. Looks like he's not taller than Stika. Hey, what do you mean? Stika was the shortest of the 5 dragons. He rolled his eyes in dissatisfaction and picked up a crystal from the ground. This is a fragment of a magic crystal, but it looks strange. It's probably not caused by an internal explosion. It fell when it was broken by brute force. Broken by brute force. Roddy turned his head in confusion. Iskar explained, if the magic crystal exploded due to internal instability, the crystal fragments wouldn't appear like this. When we do some research, we need to apply external force to open a window in the magic crystal. The energy that gushes out will cause a small crack in the magic crystal. But this is very dangerous. Even we don't use it. After all, the energy dissipates very quickly. If we're not careful, the entire lab might be destroyed. The dragons were master spellcasters. They did all kinds of experiments on a daily basis. But this was like playing with lit explosives. Normal mages wouldn't dare to do it. Roddy was confused. It wasn't the dragons who attacked Natha. Do other races or forces have this ability? Everyone looked at each other. Kardashian gestured at Stika's height. An attacker of this height. Only the wood elves in the Forest of Silent Whispers can do this, right? If they dared to do this, they would have been blown to the sky. Iskar shook his head. Not just them. Even I wouldn't dare touch the magic crystal like this. Could it be the High Elves? Roddy asked casually. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw a notification popping up on his quest panel. After becoming Prime Minister, he hadn't received a new mission for a long time. He clicked on it and found that it said, Fog of History. The truth is often covered up, and the preserved history is always incomplete. Why did the High Elves perish? You need to find all the clues step by step. Requirement: find new High Elf ruins 0 to 1. Search for the secret of the broken magic crystal. Incomplete. Quest reward: 24,000 experience points. Obtained skill, Energy Devour. Now, Roddy already understood that he had a connection with the quantum computer in another space. The generation of this kind of mission was obviously triggered by the keyword. However, the conditions for completing this quest were very broad. How was he supposed to search for the secret? Roddy did not see any notifications. The quest reward made Roddy feel a little strange. There was no explanation for the Energy Devour skill, which left him scratching his head in confusion. However, the difficulty of the quest was displayed in green, which meant extremely easy to complete. Turning his head to look at the dragons who were discussing beside him, Roddy felt that the system's judgment of the difficulty of the quest was not a problem. With these guys around, other than the counterattack on the demonic plane, the other quests would probably be extremely easy to complete. That's impossible. The so-called descendants of the High Elves in the Sacred Assembly have all taken on the appearance of humans. If they didn't flaunt their bloodline, who would treat them as High Elves? Iskar refuted Reuben's guess that there were High Elves in the forest, but the latter pointed at the forest and said, what if there's a time barrier like Elson's that allows people from that era to live until now? Isn't Edith the Arcanist an example? Edith died a long time ago. Only her soul is left. And she's a grand arcanist, not a nobody. Kardashian turned her head to look at Roddy. She noticed that he was in a daze and asked, "What do you think?" Roddy shook his head and said, "Let's look for the ruins first. Stika, can you try to find it?" The green dragon controlled the power of nature, so this kind of forest could be called home field. Stika agreed readily and began to search for the target in the dragon language. However, after he closed his eyes and sensed for 10 minutes, his expression became hesitant. Hey, no way! You can't find it?" Rubens yelled. Kardashian reached out and slapped the back of his head. "Can't you shut up?" A pale green light gradually appeared. Stika was obviously using all his strength. Roddy looked up and felt that the withered trees were shaking slightly. However, after a few minutes, Stika sighed and shook his head. "I can feel some buried ruins, but they are all buried stones or sculptures. There's no storage space. Maybe it's not around here. Let's find another place to look." Roddy nodded, but Kardashian said another possibility. "Do you use plants to detect it? If there's a high-level concealment circle in the ruins, I'm afraid you can't find it, right?" The Helsino magic tower had this ability. Although Stika was a dragon, he was not strong to the point where he was invincible. He had to admit this. However, he felt a little embarrassed that he could not help in this kind of thing. "Let me try again. If we can't find the ruins, what if it's another mercenary group?" Roddy suddenly said. "According to the status and trajectory of these mercenary groups, maybe we can find some clues?" Stika slapped his head, almost knocking off his ugly sheepskin hat. "Hey, how could I forget this? I even pretended to be a mercenary." As he cast another spell, Stika, who had locked on several targets, quickly opened his eyes and said excitedly, "I've found a team. I heard them talking about the ruins. One of them is leading the team to that place." Roddy did not suspect anything. He exhaled and said, "Everyone, follow them. Is your brain full of sh*t?" While cursing, Body kicked the stomach of the wood elf in front of him. The latter grunted and fell far away. The others standing on the side lowered their heads. In the harsh winter, the wood elves, who were not wearing warm clothes, stood there and shivered. Listening to Body's angry curses, the crystals in their hands were all put on a simple table by Body. Logically speaking, this kind of magical crystal that had suffered external damage should have exploded and shattered long ago. However, at this moment it maintained this state very stably, without any signs of energy leaking out. 9 people went there. Not only did you fail to complete the task, but you also left 2 people behind and escaped. How dare you stand in front of me and talk to me?" Body said and slapped the captain of the team several times. The captain's cheeks turned purple, and he was in so much pain that he cried. He was only 20 years old this year, and was considered a young member in the hunting team. Before this, he was not even qualified to shoot arrows when he went hunting. He could only follow behind and carry the game. But now, he was a strong captain who led the team to destroy 4 mercenary groups. But in front of the village chief, Body, he could only grit his teeth and hold back no matter how much he wanted to say. He had been brainwashed by the village chief, telling him that the strong must endure pain. So he took this pain as the motivation to continue to become stronger, and he did not complain. "From now on, increase your training. I don't care how painful your head is or whether your body can take it. You have to understand, if you are not strong enough, you will all die outside today. Do you understand?" "Yes." Chapter 971. Yes, village chief. Their short spears were very powerful, and Lynch was impaled on the spot. I wanted to help him, but before he could finish speaking, he suddenly began to pant. His cheeks, which originally had some color in them, quickly turned pale, and he began to fall to the side. His companions hurriedly supported him, but they saw that Arte's limbs were involuntarily twitching. His mouth was wide open as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Seeing this, Body picked up the magic crystal that belonged to Arte from the nearby wooden table. When he pressed the red crystal into Arte's hand, the dying fellow suddenly came back to life like a fish in water. Cough, cough. Arte, who had inhaled too quickly, choked on his own saliva and violently coughed. His hand gripped the magic crystal so hard that the edges almost pierced into his palm. But after magic slowly spread out, he quickly returned to normal. Body coldly watched all of this and said, "Continue." Arte organized his thoughts and began to narrate the details of the battle. After listening, Body's expression became gloomy, but he did not ask any more questions. He waved his hand and had them treat their wounds and eat. He then returned to his wooden house and stared blankly at the formation he had drawn countless times. Someone knocked on the round door of the treehouse. Body said, "Come in." A wood elf carefully leaned in from outside and said, "Village chief, the last batch of things has been moved back." The area of the ruins that had been discovered was not small, and there were naturally many things inside. Many of the most precious books and notes had already been broken into pieces because ordinary paper could not be preserved in the humid forest environment. Barty's collection was one of the ones that had been specially protected by a spell. Thus, they could still be flipped through and read today. Aside from these items, there were many other items in the ruins. With Barty's limited knowledge, he did not know that these were the various experimental devices in a large laboratory. But with the principle of good things should not be left for others, he ordered a few of his confidants to move the items out of the ruins. Those that could be taken were taken away, and those that could not be taken away were smashed. He had been doing this ever since he discovered the cave half a year ago. Even though the weather was cold, he still risked his life to do it. After all, some human mercenary groups had discovered that place, and now Body could finally heave a sigh of relief. "Are there any other traces?" "Village chief, there have been a few mercenary groups loitering nearby recently." "That's great. I'll find a suitable time to get rid of them once and for all." As Body spoke, he took out more than 10 pieces of magic crystal from the pile in front of him. "I know you've always been cautious. Take these and make sure they don't return." "Yes, Chief." The colorful magic crystal was enshrouded in intense energy waves. Under normal circumstances, when so many magic crystals were placed together, the elemental fluctuations between them would affect each other and eventually lead to an explosion. But now, Body casually put them into a bag woven from tree vines. No matter how much they bumped or shook, there was no reaction. The wood elves left and closed the wooden door with a click. The wooden hut fell into silence again. But at this time, one could vaguely hear the wood elves quarreling outside after finishing their practice. Not long after, it was the usual fights. The wooden walls were not good at soundproofing, nor were they good at keeping warm. Body put on another fur coat and continued to stare blankly at the magic circle in front of him. He looked a little hesitant. Because of the repeated carving of the magic circle for many days, Body now believed that he could reach the level required in the notebook. So he really wanted to try activating it. Now, Body was the most powerful wood elf apart from Urza village. His power brought unimaginable authority, so much so that most of the wood elf villages in the Silent Forest were now under his control. With power, he naturally wanted to expand. And in his eyes, Urza village was a nail that he had to pull out. How to expand? So, Body began to recruit people from various villages and began to instill the words mentioned in the notebook into the thin and weak wood elves. At first, he only imitated, but as he spoke more, his way of thinking seemed to change. Until now, Body, who was originally hesitant about expanding, had already made up his mind. But if he really wanted to become the absolute commander, he knew that he had to go further than these wood elves. Currently, these people could only cast spells with the magic crystal in their hands. Without this raw material, they would be useless. Barty wanted to control his fate in his own hands, so in the end, he stood up and decided to activate the magic circle that he had carved countless times. After embedding the magic crystal into it, Barty carefully moved the slate magic circle that he had taken from the ruins outside the hut. He also knew what the result of failure would be, so after some thought, he brought it to a hidden cave outside the village. In order not to be disturbed, he ordered his most trusted subordinates to stand guard outside and forbid anyone from entering. In order not to be disturbed, he asked his most trusted subordinates to guard outside and forbid anyone from entering. After giving a few simple instructions, he stepped into the cave and quickly completed the preparations. Then, he directly activated the small formation map. The light lit up, and the steady output of energy made Barty overjoyed. He secretly clenched his fist, and with a large magical crystal in his hand, he stood on it. For a moment, Barty felt that his body was being torn apart by the turbulent power. He tried to open his mouth to make a sound, but found that he had lost control of his body. Looking down, his body and limbs appeared to be translucent in the energy storm, and then completely fell apart. Barty's heart sank. He did not know what was going on, but once the magic circle was activated, there was no way to stop it. Before he could find a way to shut it down, the violent energy wave completely occupied his mind. When he regained consciousness, Barty suddenly sat up from the cold ground. When he realized that he was naked, he instinctively wanted to find something to cover himself, because Barty knew the consequences of hypothermia. But after a few seconds of stretching out his hand, he suddenly found that he did not feel cold. Barty looked at his arms in surprise and suddenly shouted excitedly, "That's right! I did it! I did it!" Asterisk, 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 asterisk. On the other side, Panda, who was descending from the cliff with a rope, stepped on the mountain wall in front of him. After descending for nearly 30 meters, he shouted, "Stop!" There were also mountains in the Forest of Silence, but the highest point was only about 200 meters. Therefore, there were no majestic peaks, but this did not mean that there were no steep terrains. At this time, the location where Panda and the others were at was a very hidden canyon. It was located on the inner side of the mountain. From the outside, it looked very ordinary, but if one walked in for a distance, one would find a crack that looked like the work of the gods. The huge mountain seemed to have been split open here by some kind of force. There was a gap 5 to 6 meters wide in the straight cliff. Halfway down the straight cliff, Panda followed the gap and found the simple cave in front of him. Panda looked around. There were many footprints where he landed, and there were also climbing marks on both sides of the cliff. This meant that someone had gotten here before him. However, Panda was not surprised. After all, he had accurately found this location based on the mercenary Rudy's clues. He was here now only to confirm if there were more High Elves relics inside. "Everyone, come down one by one. Leave someone to guard the top." He ordered the team of 40 or so to explore the cave. In order to ensure safety, he naturally could not let everyone go in. The team was divided into 3 groups. One group went in to explore, one stayed outside the cave, and one stood guard above. Each group also had a rotating list to conserve energy. Chapter 972. This place was so narrow that one could only see the sky when looking up from the bottom. Facing such an environment, Panda instinctively wanted to release arcane spells to check the inside of the cave. But when the spell was on the tip of his tongue, it turned into a sigh. He paused for a second and began to recite a prayer. Panda had never learned divine spells systematically, but he had gradually figured out the trick. Divine spells and arcane spells were 2 completely different systems. To release different arcane spells, the gestures, incantations, and materials needed were all different. However, to use divine spells, one only needed to try to visualize the function in one's mind, and then continuously use prayers to summon the power of the god. The strength of a divine spell was related to how much attention the god paid to the caster. Panda didn't know how those priests in Rosecross were classified. Whatever divine spells he cast now, the prayers he recited were actually the same. However, it seemed that God of Moon, Styrian, could really perceive the spell ideas in his mind and use his divine power to construct divine spells with similar effects. For spellcasters, this actually saved a lot of trouble, and it could even be said that anything is possible. But for arcanists who were used to controlling magic, leaving their fate in the hands of the god above them really made them feel uncomfortable. After reciting the prayer, the silver light bloomed. Panda pointed forward, and the dark cave was instantly filled with soft silver light. The Ice Fist mercenary group, who had lit the torches, widened their eyes and were amazed by such a divine spell. After all, the light not only illuminated everything, but also covered all the protruding objects, so people could clearly see the outline. For exploration, this kind of divine spell saved a lot of trouble. Panda had never used this divine spell before, and he was also a little surprised by the effect. But he quickly calmed down and said to the mercenary captain next to him, "Let's go in together. Everyone, split into 2 groups and get ready for battle." "Yes, Lord Priest." Captain DeWitt, who was holding a sword and a shield, was very obedient. The 2 mages on the side also held their staffs and began to cast some defensive spells. After Panda entered the cave, he turned around and looked outside. The arcane warriors and the mercenaries were guarding the cave with weapons in their hands. The mercenaries also had whistles that could be used as alarms. If anything happened, they could immediately notify the people in the cave. He clenched the necklace in his hand and walked in. The space inside the cave was much larger than he had imagined. It was certain that this place was excavated using magic. Otherwise, it would be unrealistic to excavate such a flat space in the mountain. There were all kinds of debris scattered on the ground, as well as messy footprints. At first glance, Panda noticed the magic circle that was still operating beside the door. The people who had come in earlier clearly did not understand the customs of the High Elf Arcanists. This kind of concealment magic circle had not stopped operating after so many years. He went over to take a look and found that the magic circle had only one function. It was to conceal all fluctuations in the cave. However, its level was very high. It was even stronger than the magic tower that Lord Blake was in. This discovery caused him to feel a little excited, because it was very likely that the other party was a powerful arcana master. The inheritance of such a person was definitely priceless. Prying open the sealed box, Panda saw that the magic crystal was almost depleted of energy. To be able to operate for so long, there was no doubt that the magic crystal itself was of a high level. Panda could tell that this magic crystal belonged to a high-level magical beast that even he would not be able to deal with. Yet, the owner of this ruin had placed such a precious magic crystal at the door. How rich could the owner of this ruin be? As the group went deeper into the cave, they passed by a small porch and saw a shockingly large circular living room. The dozen or so people who entered the room quickly spread out and prepared for battle. However, as far as the eye could see, they could only see decaying bookshelves and broken ancient books on the ground. This place had been completely emptied. Panda turned his head to look at the surrounding walls. Under the silver light, he saw the carvings of the High Elves. He looked carefully. When he saw the sculpture in the center, his eyes narrowed. Should I pry it off and take it away? Captain DeWitt only cared about getting rich. He was a little disappointed that someone else had beaten him to it. However, seeing that there were still some things that could be taken away for money, his professional instinct immediately kicked in. He raised his torch and looked at it carefully. Did someone break this guy's arm? No, this guy had no arm to begin with. Looking at the sculpture in front of him, Panda couldn't help but think of the name One-Armed Sumi. Clearly, this hunchbacked and ugly guy in front of him was the famous arcanist in the history of the High Elves. Panda didn't know what exactly this guy had done. Blake knew some information but didn't have time to tell him. Thus, Panda didn't stop and continued to point at the door behind them. There's no hurry to take it. Let's go in and see what else is there. Of course, they had to obey the employer's order. Captain DeWitt waved his hand and signaled his men to continue exploring. However, after walking along the corridor for a while, they realized that this so-called cave was actually a different world. There were at least 10 spacious rooms. From the furnishings inside, some were standard High Elves laboratories, while others were cages of different sizes. The Ice Fist mercenary group wasn't interested in the structure. Their eyes were always on what they could take away. The two magicians weren't weak, but they knew nothing about the High Elves' language and couldn't understand it. So, they didn't even bother looking at it. At most, they would cast a spell to make sure there weren't any traps around. Under such circumstances, Panda obtained a lot of information. In these rooms, there were all kinds of words written on the walls. In some of the laboratories, there were a few magic circles recorded. In the cage-like rooms, there were all kinds of curses. I'm going to tear your head off. I'm going to drink your blood, tear your windpipe, and let you know what pain is. I'm going to watch you die with my own eyes. No matter how much pain I suffer, I'm going to endure until that day comes. There were many words engraved deeply on the stone walls. Panda silently observed all this. As he walked, he suddenly froze. He saw a familiar sentence written in one of the corners. Styrian looks at me. Moon God, please save your servant. Priest? Chapter 973. In this situation, the mages who didn't seem to have any melee combat skills were useless. Only 7 or 8 mercenaries were left who could fight. Body looked at his subordinate. Other than the ones who had fallen, there were at least 15 strong warriors left. With twice the number of people, they could definitely defeat them. Quick! He pulled out the long sword hanging from his waist and rushed towards Eshin with the other 3 beside him. But after running a few steps, they were surprised to find that the human mercenaries who had been knocked down had actually stood up. Under the silver light falling from the sky, the wounds on their bodies quickly healed, and their physical strength quickly recovered. Captain DeWitt stood up with a dumbfounded look on his face. Seeing Body and the others coming towards them, he immediately shouted, "Charge!" The mercenaries and arcane warriors who had been seriously injured quickly closed in. Everyone knew that this was the effect of the Panda priest's divine spell. Taking advantage of the divine spell, the mercenaries quickly formed a simple formation with 2 rows in front and back. Under DeWitt's lead, they walked towards Body and directly past Iskar, Eshin, and the others to take the lead and fight the Wood Elves. The appearance of the divine miracle turned the tide of the battle once again. This time, DeWitt and the others found that their strength had greatly increased, and their physical strength seemed to be unlimited. Facing the attacks of the Wood Elves, even if they were hit by swords, their wounds would quickly heal, and they didn't even feel any pain. All of this increased the morale of the mercenaries. Even without the help of Roddy and the others, they could see that the Wood Elves were continuously retreating. The divine domain caused the strength of the Wood Elves to continuously decrease. After swinging his sword a few times, Body found that the speed of his physical strength consumption was far beyond his imagination. Even though the Wood Elves under him fought bravely, after a few rounds, they were cut down by the enemy due to their slow movements and lack of strength. Although he didn't understand what was going on, he knew that if he continued like this, the situation would only get worse. Roddy and the others stood on the periphery of the chaotic battle, and the situation was quite awkward. Rubens's clothes were torn, and Iskar's hat fell to the ground. But before they could show their power, the battle inexplicably turned around. Stika, who had failed to transform, was the first to react. He bent down to pick up the hat on the ground. What should we do? Rhodey really did not expect to encounter the legendary God's Domain. What made everyone speechless was that the dragons in the God's Domain could neither cast spells nor transform. Even if they wanted to expose their strength, they could only let others see that they were a little stronger. That was all. Put on your clothes. Let's continue acting. Rhodey did not believe it. Let's see what other tricks he has up his sleeves. He pushed his hat askew as he spoke. The dragons around him quickly changed their original expressions and began to pick up the clothes that they had just torn or thrown away. Rubens's coat had been torn to pieces. In this situation, he muttered helplessly, "If I knew this, I wouldn't have torn it. Where can I find clothes to wear?" His upper body was completely naked, and his strong muscles were exposed in the cold air. It was too eye-catching. Eshin looked very similar to him. The two looked at each other, picked up the weapons that had already been deformed, turned around and followed Roddy's footstep. Together, they joined the charge against the Wood Elves. At the back, Kardashian naturally couldn't go up with weapons. She turned her head to look at Panda and found that another priest was looking after him. This priest, who had asked the god Styrian to create the divine domain, was now unconscious. In addition to the noise of the battlefield, they obviously didn't notice the movement of Roddy and the others. "How are you guys?" Kardashian shouted. Lewis was hiding behind a tree after being shot in the shoulder. At this time, he poked his head out and said, "I can still hold on. I'm fine." Adam was hiding in a deep pit more than 10 meters away. He raised his hand and waved. "I'm still alive." After confirming the position and status of these guys, Kardashian looked up at the sky. The dazzling white light had begun to dissipate. The divine domain brought about a buff that was different from any spell she had experienced before. While the others were busy fighting, perhaps Kardashian was the only one present who was fully focused on understanding the power of the gods. When she closed her eyes for a moment, the sound of the battlefield gradually quieted down. When she opened her eyes, the effect of the illumination spell that she had cast before had also begun to dim. The wood elves in front of her had begun to retreat, and they were now quickly retreating into the distance. After they entered the darkness, DeWitt seemed to have gone berserk and was about to chase after them while roaring. However, he was shouted back by Roddy. "Are you guys crazy? Trying to catch up with the wood elves in the forest?" These words quickly extinguished their anger. The mercenaries who were already in a scattered formation all stopped running. At this time, there were only about 10 people left in the line. Roddy pretended to be panting and looked back at the ground. Other than the wood elves, there were still a few mercenaries lying in a pool of blood. Obviously, the Ice Fist mercenary group had suffered a heavy loss this time. Basically, only a few people were left alive. This was what a real mercenary group had to face every day. Comrades who were chatting with each other a second ago might die in front of them the next second. As giant dragons, Iskar and the others knew that humans were far weaker than them. However, being in the middle of the whirlpool, they still felt a little sad when they saw the survivors' anger and sorrow, and when they saw their comrades lying in the snow together with them. Although dragons claimed to be superior creatures, they weren't so rational that they didn't have feelings. At this time, the battle was over. Mercenary Soria turned around and saw Rubens was shirtless. He immediately shook off the snow on the ground and put it on him. "Don't freeze. You can die if you're too cold." Rubens, who was a little stunned, took the blanket and said "thank you," which was rare. However, Soria didn't say anything else. He limped towards his fallen comrades. When they were in the divine realm, their strength and wounds were recovering rapidly. However, now that the realm was gone, they felt like they had fallen from a warm fireplace into a bone-chilling river. Fatigue, pain, and cold quickly made them feel tired and uncomfortable. The mages didn't have enough magic power to cast the illumination spell. Facing the dark forest, they didn't know if the wood elves would come back to counterattack. They could only quickly retreat back to the camp. Chapter 974. Let me do it. Rubens, who was standing in the snow, looked at the sentries a few hundred meters away and waved his hand. I promise not a single trace will be left. Stika looked disgusted. Has the black dragon Hurlo always been this brainless? Does he always solve every problem with violence? Isn't this the most direct way? Once and for all. Rubens chuckled. In fact, he said that on purpose. Even though the dragons were powerful, it did not mean that they were bloodthirsty. He was just a little bored. After all, for the dragons who were used to walking alone in the mountains, this kind of action was not exciting at all. The destination is obviously below this cliff. If we want to go down, it seems that it will be difficult to go around them? Roddy asked. Eshin replied, I can create an illusion. We can just walk over. That's for the best. Roddy took a deep breath and took a sip from the water bag that had been warmed by magic. He said as they walked, there have been too many wars. I really don't want to see more dead people now. The dragons usually did not care about the life and death of humans. But the war that happened half a year ago also affected them. So when they heard Roddy's lament, everyone was a little silent. In fact, they all experienced the confusion and fear of the future. No one knew how many humans or dragons would survive when the War of the Demons broke out in the future. Natha held her longbow and walked at the front. Roddy always told her to relax, but the wood elf still consciously took on the role of scout. After all, the entire team of 5 dragons were strong, and Roddy was the prime minister. He could not let the kingdom's #1 scout in front, could he? After entering the forest, she clearly felt that her ability was not just a little stronger than before. Her limbs that were reconstructed and healed by Morales were not only flexible and strong, but most importantly, it greatly improved her perception in the forest. Natha even had an illusion that her range of senses had expanded a lot. She did not feel cold at all when she walked in the snow. Let's go down and see what's there. Kardashian came to her side and said, just go there and leave the rest to Eshin. Natha nodded and then looked back at Eshin. The latter's eyes emitted a faint light. He did not make any gestures or incantations at all. When the group of people walked all the way to the edge of the cliff, the soldiers on duty were still sitting there and watching, not noticing anything at all. There's no need to hold your breath. Eshin isn't that bad. Roddy had already arrived at the edge of the cliff. He smiled and patted Natha, who was tense all over. He lowered his head in slight embarrassment and drew his bowstring to ease the nervousness in his heart. The 3 members of the Ice Fist mercenary group and the 4 soldiers of the Holy Assembly were standing at the side. They were talking about what to eat for dinner. The closest one among them was less than 3 meters away from Roddy, but they all turned a blind eye to him. Rubens and Stika were even more outrageous. They directly stood in front of the mercenaries, reached out their hands to comment on their equipment, and then began to complain that they did not dress like mercenaries. Dragons, are they really that powerful? It was indeed Natha's first time seeing such a powerful spell. After all, her understanding of magic was more about destructive power. Spells like illusion, which were more supportive, were really beyond her imagination. If you are interested, you can also learn it. I think your talent is actually quite good. Kardashian replied casually. Natha glanced at them. She felt that the dragons were always taking care of her intentionally or unintentionally. However, the latter just smiled and then said to Roddy, let's go down together. Let's go, let's go. Don't talk nonsense. Iskar tightened the big bag on his back and reached out to grab Rubens and Stika. Right now, all he could think of was to find a magical beast to test out the cannon after he was done with this matter. He could not bear to see the two of them wasting time. After confirming that the entrance to the ruins was below them, they directly jumped down from the cliff. An invisible wave enveloped them, allowing them to land safely outside the cave below. Eshen's illusion was still working. The mercenaries standing outside the cave looked around vigilantly, but they could not see the people in front of them. Roddy looked around. The cave was indeed very well hidden. He did not know how the people who first discovered this place found it. Stika complained, "I really do not like these high elves. The magic formation at the entrance is of such a high level. If I did not see it with my own eyes, I would not have been able to find it with spells." "What kind of level is this?" asked Roddy. Beside him, Kardashian also could not confirm. She turned to look at Iskar and Eshen. The three of them paused for a few seconds. Finally, it was Iskar who spoke. "The structure of this magic formation seems to be different from that of the High Elf Arcanists. We can only see that it is of a high level, but it is not the same as that of a Grand Arcanist like Edith." This was a bit confusing, but Roddy could understand. There was no fixed standard for the magic system. Arcanist, Grand Arcanist, Magician, and Magician could not be equated. There was a big difference in power between people in different systems. The master of this cave might be close in power to Edith, but he could not be judged by the eyes of a normal Grand Arcanist. "I remember that there are different schools of Arcanists, but in the end there is only one that is the mainstream, right?" Roddy had only learned this from the ancient books left in Wagra City, but it was only a few words. The dragon race was more aware of this. Iskar was obviously a learner. He immediately added, "In the early and middle period of the High Elves, Arcanists used the magic crystal as a source of energy for research, similar to the magicians of today. However, there were many schools of thought at that time, and they all used the magic crystal in different ways. Later, the appearance of the rechargeable crystal changed the situation, unifying the entire Arcanist world. After all, the rechargeable crystal is safe and effective. Who wouldn't want to use it?" As they talked, they walked into the ruins. Eshen did not speak. He only raised his hand and cast a spell at the inside of the ruins. After the spell was finished, Rubens snapped his fingers. The whole space was filled with a soft light, and all the details were revealed. It had been less than an hour since Panda had entered. However, the powerful dragons had obviously found more things than the explorers before. Not to mention anything else, Roddy was first stunned by the map he opened. Because of the time sense skill, he could see the existence of a space-time crack nearby. Chapter 975. Without waiting for Roddy to tell them about his discovery, the dragons began to discuss other discoveries. Kardashian pointed to an empty space. "The elemental aura here is very violent. Magic crystal must have been stored here." Rubens squatted on the other side and sniffed. "Is this person crazy? How dare they put so many mana crystals? There are at least 100 pieces of magic crystal from different magical beasts. Everyone, there may be other things in there. Let's be careful." Roddy interrupted them. Natha raised her bow and arrow and aimed at the corridor. Kardashian tilted her head and asked, "What is it?" Roddy pointed to the dark corridor and said, "I suspect that the original owner of this place is also the owner of a space-time rift." These words immediately made the dragons, who were relaxed, feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Stika, who had found a stone chair to sit on, suddenly stood up. The experience of Morales and Quio was a lesson to them. The space-time rift had now changed from a resource to a poison, so they had no choice but to be cautious. "Is it related to the demons?" Iskar clenched his fist slightly, ready to fight at any time. Roddy, however, waved his hand. "Don't reveal your identity unless it's necessary. We are disguised mercenaries. Hiding our aura is actually an advantage. If we go in as dragons, no one knows if we will attract the attention of some people. His words made Rubens, who was about to take off his hat and return to his dragon man form, stop. He was impatient and could not help but ask, "Will there be any invasion?" "So far, no." Roddy carefully observed the gray mark on the map and judged based on his previous experience. This space-time rift seems to be almost exhausted. I can't feel the aura of the demons, but we still need to take a closer look. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. When Rubens heard that there was nothing to worry about, he immediately tried to bluff. However, Stika still kicked him in the butt. "Be careful. Which mercenary would carry out a mission like you?" "Ahem, I know. Rubens calmed down and held the machete on his waist in his hand. Because it was cheap, the machete was even rusty. Rubens didn't expect it to fight anyway, so he didn't care about it. But with the conversation between him and Stika, the team's originally relaxed atmosphere became serious. The few people who were on a stroll had now become a real exploration team. In the depths of the cave, Panda and the others still had no idea what was happening behind them. He didn't know if it was an illusion, because when he turned his head to look at the wall, he suddenly felt a little dazed. Did he not rest well? Panda rubbed his eyes and tried to look around, only to find that everything was still the same. Under the illumination of the torches, the large area of the underground ruins was a little disappointing, because everything that could be moved had been moved away. The remaining furniture and instruments had long since decayed into pieces in the long river of time. Damn it! If they couldn't take it away, they just smashed it. These people are really crazy. The mercenary leader complained bitterly about the behavior of the wood elves. Under the orders of the village chief, Body, the bulky things that couldn't be taken out were violently smashed, including sculptures, bookshelves, and all kinds of unknown instruments. Many objects from the High Elves' era had exquisite patterns and relief carvings. Even if it was just a flower stand, it could be sold for a high price outside. But DeWitt held the broken pieces in his hand and could only curse the people who got here first. "This area is big. Maybe we can find something if we look around." Panda casually comforted him and went in front of a wall. He found a gap here, reached out his hand and touched it. He actually felt a slight breeze. "Let's pry it open and see." He immediately asked someone to come over and check. 3 mercenaries used the pickaxes they brought to pry a few times and actually moved the mechanism that looked like a secret door. The elementalist next to them used magic to help, and the group worked together to open the door. Suddenly, they saw a small secret room. "We're rich." The light from the torches illuminated the various instruments in the room. Mercenary Captain DeWitt immediately saw the exquisite experimental instruments and magic crystal on the table. The beautiful colors made him cry out involuntarily. Priest Panda was also happy, but he didn't lose his cool. He immediately arranged for people to keep watch outside the room and also sent people in to check for traps. After a series of spell tests proved that the room was indeed safe, Panda finally let out a sigh of relief and stepped into the secret room. As soon as he entered, he saw the iconic sculpture, One-Armed Sumi. The High Elves had a very strong love for sculptures. Solomon had made countless sculptures of himself in his palace, and this arcanist Sumi seemed to have the same hobby. Moving his gaze away, Panda saw a black book on the table. It was numbered in the High Elves' language. He could tell at a glance that it was Experiment Journal, because many of the books and notes kept in the Holy Assembly were numbered in this way. This discovery made him overjoyed. Beside him, mercenary Captain DeWitt seemed even happier. Other than the high-quality magic crystal in front of him, there was also a gilded feather pen, a ruby-inlaid ink bottle, and 3 or 4 elegant short wands. Elementalist Lewis took a closer look and said in surprise, "This is a high-quality wand. I'm afraid it's above the level of a magician." The entire group was unusually excited. They couldn't help but be happy that they had found such a treasure. However, Panda suddenly felt strange. He stared at the short wands and felt that he had seen them somewhere before. A gilded feather pen? He didn't remember the high elves having the habit of gilding their quills. However, this was a hidden ruin, so it wasn't surprising to see anything. Panda looked away and began to silently chant a prayer, begging Styrian to solidify the books in front of him. The divine spell was quickly answered. A soft silver light fell, and when he reached out to flip through the books, the fragile paper would no longer shatter easily. Panda carefully moved closer and carefully read the words on the book. These people obviously didn't know that behind them, Roddy and the others were standing at the door, watching them. Looks like this is the leader of the mercenary group. Kardashian looked around. They should be ordinary mercenaries. I don't feel the aura of an arcanist. She had once killed a group of members in front of the Hersino magic tower, so she was very familiar with the aura of an arcanist. That was why she made such a judgment. Eshen's control over illusions was clearly beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Natha aimed her bow at the magician, but the group didn't seem to notice that there were 7 people chatting behind them. In her vision, it was just an ordinary empty house. Just like the outside, everything in the house had long been emptied and smashed, and the ground was full of debris. However, these mercenaries were happily waving their hands in the air, saying strange things like, "Get rich," which made Natha feel very strange. Roddy carefully listened to Panda and the others' conversation, but they seemed to be busy taking away the treasures in the illusion and didn't say anything important. He was only curious about the skill Panda used. What spell is this? The dragons all saw the soft silver light. Kardashian's expression changed. Divine spell? This aura. She suddenly raised her head and looked at the sky. She could only see the pitch-black ceiling here. However, the dragon race had studied this kind of aura that came from a higher level. Iskar, who was beside her, was the first to react. How could it be the moon god? There are still believers of Styrian. Eshen frowned. At this time, Roddy realized that even with his understanding of this world, there was still a blind spot. As a senior player, he had never heard of the name Styrian, and for so many years, no one had mentioned the name Moon God. Is this cult very old? Chapter 976. Then, what about the goddess Chi that most people are talking about? Roddy suddenly asked. Kardashian raised her eyelashes slightly and glanced at him secretly. Her name doesn't seem to be Chi. What's her name again? Stika rubbed his eyebrows. Rubens added, Critias, I remember it's this. Isn't it Porcius? Obviously, none of the dragons had an accurate record of Porcius's name. This was something that even Kardashian did not know before. However, everyone unanimously gave the same conclusion. Goddess Chi is the last recorded god. Roddy nodded as if he understood. The scene quieted down. Everyone felt strange about the sudden appearance of the Moon God clan here, but not to the extent that they could not understand. While the dragons were marveling at the vitality of this sect, Kardashian was deep in thought. She and Roddy's experience in the prison of time and space could not be told to others. Since her return, she had actually been looking for a way to break through that belonged to the dragons. In the past 6 months, Kardashian sorted out all the things she had learned from the Earth plane. Through a war, she put a lot of theoretical knowledge into practice. Such an experience made her feel a lot of emotions. Although her level of magic did not improve much, the breadth and depth of her thinking had a significant leap. This was more important than the level of magic power. For the dragons, behind the seemingly powerful talent, there was a ceiling that was difficult to break. This was because the strongest dragons could only stop at demigod. After reaching the level of their father, Victor, the path of advancement was almost equivalent to a closed door for the dragons. Since the beginning of the history of the dragons, except for the dragon god Audelis, that they praised, There had never been any existence that crossed the step of demigod. The problem was, the dragon god Audelis had never responded to the summons and prayers of these juniors. There was no difference between his existence and non-existence. To become a god, Kardashian had to find another way. However, this was a problem that even a lord could not solve. For her, it might take her a lifetime to slowly ponder over. Seeing the believers of the Moon God clan using the divine power from heaven, she shook her head and couldn't help but ask, to the Moon God Styrian, what are these believers? Perhaps, before Roddy could finish his words, Iskar suddenly raised his hand and made a hush gesture. You must be careful when speaking to a god who can perform miracles. It was a seemingly unintentional sentence, but Roddy felt cold sweat on his forehead. What he had wanted to say just now was indeed a little slanderous. In his opinion, the faith of the believers formed the foundation of the existence of the god. The purpose of the god's response to the believers was nothing more than to cultivate more believers to strengthen himself. What was the difference between this and watering and fertilizing rice or feeding sows? In the end, he was just using her. Glancing at Panda, who was casting the magic, Roddy finally resisted the desire to speak. He turned his head and saw that Natha was looking at him. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong?" "No, nothing," Natha quickly looked away. She rarely took the initiative to talk to Roddy, but just now she couldn't help but want to remind him to be careful of this kind of words related to the god. But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she didn't say it. Roddy didn't continue to ask. He looked back and saw that Rubens and the others had begun to walk in. There were still some rooms in the depths of the ruins that had not been explored. Since the illusion could make these mercenaries live in peace with themselves, they had no intention of conflict. Anyway, they were here to seek information, not to dig for treasures. Let's go and see what's inside. With a group of knowledgeable dragons following him, Roddy already knew that this was the residence of a minority arcanist. This arcanist was good at using the power of magic crystal directly, and his own magic attainments were superb. The spells he used were not arcana, but a form of combination of arcana and elements. With these inferences, Roddy had already determined the identity of the group that attacked Natha. However, he was not in a hurry to take revenge. At least he wanted to see the space crack inside the ruins first. However, not long after the group of people stepped into the depths of the ruins, Panda, who had been flipping through books in the secret room for a long time, frowned deeper and deeper. This was because he discovered something strange. Everything he saw was exactly the same as what he had imagined. He thought that one-armed Sumi would leave behind a skill on the use of magic crystal. As a result, he really found a book with such content. However, after opening it, the content was messy, as if it needed to be deciphered. When he flipped through other books, he thought that it would be great if there was a diary or something like that. In the end, when he reached out to take a look, he found that it was indeed a diary, recording all kinds of daily life. However, this was not enough to make him suspicious. More importantly, the mercenary captain found a secret compartment under the table. After using a pickaxe to pry it open, there was a box of jewelry made of gold inside. These high elves are really rich. Elementalist Lewis's eyes were shining. After all, gold was a hard currency. With one look, he could tell that the jewelry in front of him was extremely high in gold. It would not be a problem to melt it down and use it directly. However, thinking of the contract they had signed, they calmed down and turned to look at Panda. Lord Priestess, this jewelry. You were the one who found it. I can give this box to you. The mercenaries were overjoyed at Panda's reply. However, seeing their reactions, he felt that something was wrong. Why would they hide jewelry under the floor in a grand arcanist's laboratory? The high elves were very artistic, but they rarely used gold to make jewelry. This was the Holy Assembly's understanding of the high elves. Gold jewelry was something that only human nobles liked. Only these mercenaries would think that the high elves were the same as human nobles. Wait. Suddenly realizing something, Panda turned his head and looked around. He closed his eyes and suddenly began to chant a prayer. However, after casting 3 divine spells in a row, the surroundings did not change at all. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Ignoring the strange gazes of the mercenaries, he began to recite the prayer loudly again. He then knelt on the ground with his arms facing the sky. May your light shine on the earth in the dark night. He gripped the necklace in his hand tightly. When the divine spell's light returned to him in an even more intense way, he suddenly opened his eyes. He immediately found that there were no books, diaries, or treasures around him. "We've been tricked," shouted Panda. However, it seemed that he was the only one who had seen through the illusion. The others were still holding the treasures in their hands and looking at him. Captain DeWitt did not understand. "What are you talking about?" But Panda did not have the time to explain. He saw footprints on the ground that did not belong to this team. He immediately ordered, "Follow me. Prepare for battle. It's here." After walking for a short distance, Roddy found the location of the space-time fissure, according to the cursor on the map. Looking at the formation that was made of white stones, the 5 WRMS around them looked much more serious. At this time, Rubens and Sticka no longer bickered with each other. Instead, they carefully examined the magic circle. However, before the space-time fissure appeared, they could not detect any fluctuations at all. In the end, it was Roddy who used the magician's hand to move the stone in the center of the magic circle. When everyone looked over, they were shocked to find that there was a dim ball spinning slowly. "Prime Minister, is this thing safe?" At this time, even the dragons had to ask for help from Roddy, who had the space-time sensitivity. As a green dragon, Sticka was greatly traumatized by the demonic invasion. He stared nervously at the space-time fissure and prepared to defend himself at any time. "It should be safe. It's basically exhausted. If we were to describe it as a mine, this should be the state where the mine has been mined." Roddy could not feel the demonic aura, so he made this conclusion. Rubens pointed at the magic circle. "This high elf can study space-time fissure? Then it must be of a high level. What is this place for?" Chapter 977. As soon as he finished speaking, the silent spell formation suddenly released a bright light. The dim sphere swelled up, and the white light grew brighter and brighter. Its momentum immediately shocked everyone present. Rubens immediately realized that he was in trouble and immediately jumped to the side. However, the light did not diminish. The entire magic circle had begun to emit waves as if it had been activated. However, the energy of the space-time rift had dried up, and everything was progressing very slowly. Roddy and the others watched as the space-time rift was torn apart inexplicably and grew larger. In the end, it was as tall as a person. The chaotic gray on the surface of the sphere changed rapidly. Roddy stared at it with his eyes wide open. Suddenly, his expression changed. Damn it, needless to say, the other dragons also sensed the demonic aura contained within it. However, before they could cast a spell to forcibly stop it, the entire sphere began to rapidly collapse. 2 seconds later, it had completely shrunk to the size of a palm. Finally, with a buzz, it completely disappeared. Obviously, the space-time rift had exhausted the last of its energy. Natha raised her bow helplessly. She had no other means of attack, but she looked around. Everyone, including Roddy, frowned and did not speak for a long time. Did I cause trouble?" Rubens raised both of his hands. No matter how much he joked in the past, when it came to matters related to demons, he could not afford to be careless. He was afraid that he would end up like Lord Quio and the others. For a moment, the entire dragon panicked. Roddy shook his head. The aura seemed to come from the demonic plane. However, no living demons have noticed this place, or rather, they have not had the time to notice this place. No matter what, something is not right. Perhaps we should call the lords over? Iskar stared cautiously at the center of the magic circle. However, just as he finished speaking, footsteps were heard outside the room. Then, a group of mercenaries came directly to the door. The leader, Panda, held the moon god necklace in his hand. When he saw Roddy and the others, he immediately stopped in his track. "Who are you?" "Huh." Roddy was shocked. They did not take this group of people seriously at first, because the illusion could guarantee that they would not be discovered. However, the current situation had obviously exceeded their expectations. The other 4 dragons in the room all turned to look at Eshin. The latter's wooden expression did not change much, but he could not help but mutter in the dragon language, "This is impossible," but Panda wasn't surprised. The rustic mercenaries in front of him were all stunned. Panda, DeWitt, and the others naturally understood the expression on their faces as astonishment when they were cut off from the back. At this moment, Panda was somewhat proud of himself. He had used his knowledge and vigilance to successfully use the divine arts to decipher the illusion that had bewitched him. However, this priest had immediately concluded that the illusion was a product of the ruins. He had never thought that this group of rustic mercenaries in front of him would be able to use it. Styrian had taken care of him, but as an arcanist, Panda had also made a wrong judgment because he did not know the limit of the effect of the divine arts. He had no idea how high the level of the illusion was. At this time, Panda did not forget to specially chant a prayer, asking the moon god to cast an area of effect divine arts on all the teammates around him. As he quickly finished chanting the prayer, all the mercenaries who followed him could see clearly who Roddy and the others were. Both sides immediately fell into a standoff inside and outside the room. The group of mercenaries and members of the Holy Assembly all unsheathed their weapons and raised their staffs. Under the dense magic waves, it was as if they were ready to fight. Compared to these mercenaries, the posture of Roddy and the others was obviously a bit comical. Among the 7 of them, other than Natha who held up her bow, the others all had their hands hanging down. Even Rubens had his back to them. "Put down your weapons." Captain DeWitt was the first to speak with his sword and shield in hand. He felt that he had more people on his side, and their equipment was obviously of a higher grade. Hence, he had a psychological advantage. Roddy was facing the group from the side. He had originally planned to solve the problem by force. However, when he heard the prayer that Panda was chanting in the High Elf language, he was obviously stunned. He then looked to the side. Rubens and Stika did not realize the problem. Instead, it was Iskar, Eshin, and Kardashian who all looked at him inquiringly. High Elf language was not something that just anyone could understand. On this continent, other than the dragons, there were basically only a handful of people who could understand High Elf language. Among humans, only the members of the Holy Assembly were proficient in this language. Roddy really wanted to know what the relationship between the Moon God clan and the Holy Assembly was, but the dragons wanted to understand one more question. Why did Eshin's magic fail in the face of a low-level divine spell? Although the classification of professions could not accurately measure an individual's strength, it was a well-known fact that low-level divine spells could not break high-level magic. Moreover, Eshin was not using ordinary magic, but high-level dragon language magic. Even if it could be broken, it would need to be a papal conman. How could these people in front of them have a chance? I'll say it again, put down your weapons. Otherwise, we won't be polite. The mercenary Captain Devitt had no idea what they were thinking about. He just felt that these people were a little strange for them to be standing there like idiots, so he directly shouted. His voice was very loud, and such a shout in the enclosed space made everyone's ears ring. How could the black dragon Herlo Rubens, who was already in a bad mood, stand this kind of provocation? Immediately, he turned his head with a dark expression. You! Before he could finish his sentence, Roddy rushed over and blocked in front of him. Don't be anxious, don't be anxious. Let's talk this out. As Roddy spoke, he turned his back on Panda and the others, and quickly gave Rubens and the few dragons behind them a look. Although the light in the room was dim, everyone understood that Roddy did not intend to let them expose their identities now. The dragons were not stupid. They immediately understood that in this state of disguise, they might be able to obtain more information than if they used violence. It was not that the dragons did not know how to extort documents by torture, but when faced with a fellow who could use divine arts to break high-level illusions, who knew what other tricks he had up his sleeve. The dragons were not afraid of Panda, but in their hearts they knew that a god was not a joke. Although God's punishment was rare, it had happened in the history of the dragons. Therefore, Rubens, who was about to explode, quickly calmed down after being stopped by Roddy. He resisted the desire to unleash his dragon power and looked down at the ground. Roddy was also sweating in his heart. Among this group of people, only Kardashian would truly stand on the same line as him forever. Although the other dragons were usually on good terms, in an emergency situation, it was still a question whether they would be willing to listen to a human like him. Fortunately, his previous efforts did not go to waste. Judging from the current situation, the people in front of him were still giving him face. Roddy patted Rubens on the shoulder. When he turned his face to the side, he reached out to pull the leather hat that he was wearing a little lower. At the same time, he advised in a persuasive tone, "Listen to the leader, listen to the leader. Have you forgotten what happened the last time you were impulsive?" His tone changed drastically at this moment. He was no longer speaking in perfect Bringan, but with a unique Southern Kalan accent. At the same time, he dragged the last syllable, making it seem like he had a glib accent. People who mingled in mercenary groups usually spoke in this manner. Roddy had dealt with many mercenaries in the past, so it was natural for him to disguise himself as a mercenary. In the process of comforting Rubens, Roddy secretly glanced at Kardashian. The latter happened to be standing in the middle when facing the magic circle, which made her look like the leader. She immediately frowned and waved at Roddy. "Pull him aside." "Yes, Leader Julia." Roddy's acting skills were in place quickly. At the same time, he gave Kardashian a fake name and quickly pulled Rubens to the side of the group. Chapter 978. Speaking of acting, Kardashian and Roddy had cooperated more than once or twice, so she immediately got into character and used the same southern accent to fight back. At the same time, her magic staff emitted a wave of magic. This level was equivalent to a high-level mage. The strong magic wave was enough to make the other party feel wary, but not afraid. After she said this, Iskar, Eshin, and Stika also seemed to have pressed a switch. Everyone put on the alert that mercenaries should have and held the hilt of their swords in a dignified manner. Natha, who had been silent all this while, was shocked by the reaction of the group of giant dragons. She opened her mouth slightly and almost let go of the arrow in her hand. When she saw Roddy was clumsily putting the arrow on the bowstring, she realized that everyone was acting. Natha wanted to help, but she quickly realized that she didn't have to do anything and just stood there obediently. DeWitt and the others didn't know that they had escaped a disaster. At first, they thought that the mercenary group's reaction was a little strange, but at this moment it was obvious that they knew, so no one thought much about it. Panda looked at Roddy, who was pulled away by Rubens, and frowned slightly. He was measuring the strength of both sides and felt a little strange, because he felt that Roddy's face was a little familiar. As the Prime Minister, Roddy didn't have a personality cult, but when he held the meeting in front of the Dragon Tower, his photo on the stage was published on the second page of Cullen's Era. Of course, Panda and the other members of the Holy Assembly had studied this nemesis, so he immediately suspected Roddy's identity. However, after Roddy lowered his hat and deliberately changed his demeanor, he no longer had the aura of a so-called superior. Anyone who saw his greasy-tongued manner, coupled with the fact that he was carrying a bow on his back but could not even knock an arrow, would think that he was the mercenary leader's henchman who constantly flattered him. How could this kind of existence be the same as Prime Minister Roddy, who stood upright in front of the dragons? The others didn't think too much about it, but Panda still had doubts in his heart. After staring at Roddy for a long time, the latter pointed at his nose and said, "What are you looking at? Didn't you hear what our leader said?" "Leader Julia, I am the priest of the Moon God clan." Panda, he ignored Roddy's arrogance and turned to look at Kardashian. "No one has the right of ownership of the ruins. Since we can come here, we can explore with our own ability, right?" Panda's attitude was tough, but Kardashian didn't back down either. "Well, let's fight with our own ability. The winner can continue to explore, and the loser can get out of here." This kind of wrangling was basically testing the bottom line. After all, no one would really be naive enough to use the duel method to solve the problem. In fact, the fact that they didn't fight at the beginning meant that both sides had the idea of keeping the peace. After all, no one was stupid. If a mage casually cast a spell in a cave like this, it might even cause a cave-in. At this time, Panda had already determined that the group of wood elves had stolen the things here. He estimated that there wouldn't be many valuable things here no matter how much they searched. Therefore, he didn't have much intention to continue to stay in the ruins. After seeing that Kardashian was unmoved by persuasion and completely rejected their request to explore the ruins together, he directly chose to give in. "Well, since we can't come to an agreement, let's each take a step back. From here to the outside area, we will take some things and leave. The inside area belongs to you. How about that?" Kardashian's eyes twinkled, and then she nodded and said, "Okay." She looked like a very calculating mercenary leader. After all, the big bag on Iskar's back was too eye-catching. Panda and the others naturally thought that it was the loot from the ruins. "Lord Panda! Listen to me. Let's go." DeWitt asked reluctantly, but Panda waved his hand and decisively left. He knew that the real wealth was probably with the wood elves. He didn't feel bad leaving the ruins to them. However, just as Panda took 2 steps back and was about to turn around and leave, a lot of dust and gravel suddenly fell from above. Everyone in the ruins froze for a moment. The dust fell on DeWitt's head, causing him to squint his eyes. "Damn it, why is there still dust here? Something's wrong." Panda's expression changed. In less than 2 seconds, everyone could faintly hear the sound of a whistle coming from the corridor behind them. This meant that something had happened to the team outside, and they were sounding the whistle to warn them. "Retreat!" he immediately shouted. However, the entire team was well trained. The few arcane warriors who were originally members of the Sacred Assembly turned around and rushed out first, while Panda brought up the rear. He left the room with DeWitt and Lewis. After confirming that Kardashian didn't make any strange movements, they turned around and began to speed up their retreat. When the dragons in the room saw that Panda had left, Kardashian waved her hand and released a soundproof barrier. She turned to ask Stika, "What's the situation outside?" "You'll have to ask Rubens." Stika looked at the black dragon Hurlo beside him. The latter pressed his hand on the wall next to him. After a moment of concentration, a strange expression appeared on his face. "There's a group of wood elves attacking them from the top of the cliff, and..." He seemed to be able to clearly see the movements of the group. He raised his eyebrows. "Tisk tsk. They seem to have dug a hole here long ago. They intend to use the magic crystal to blow this place up." His words were calm. It was obvious that Rubens did not take it to heart at all. Roddy breathed a sigh of relief. "Looks like we're right. The wood elves in the village have probably mastered some strange magic. This allows them to use the power of the magic crystal without exploding. That's just picking up from others. It doesn't matter. Iskar sat on the stone bench beside him and said with a serious face, "The point is, Eshin, how did your illusion get broken by the divine art?" "I can confirm that even the Pope of the Rose Cross Church would not be able to break the level of illusion just now." Although Eshin did not say anything, he was carefully feeling the aura of the divine art on Panda. However, no matter how he looked, he could confirm that the level of the divine art was not high. In theory, there was no possibility of breaking through the illusion. He took off his leather hat, rubbed his bald head, and then rubbed his cheeks hard. He was extremely anxious. Natha was still pointing her bow at the door. Dust and gravel fell on her arm. The wood elf looked up worriedly and found that there was a crack on the stone wall above her. "What should we do next?" Kardashian raised her hand and froze the entire roof with an ice spell. Everyone looked at Roddy. At this time, he was no longer as wretched as before. He recalled what Calcius said before and hung the bow on his back. "I have an idea. We can try outside the cave." The bodies of the mercenaries were already lying on the ground. The wood elf Scotch, who was wearing a tattered cloak, raised his hand and blew away the last mercenary who tried to resist. The violent explosion directly blew the mercenary off the cliff. His scream echoed in the valley, but it was quickly covered by the muffled rumbling. "Quick, dodge! Get out of here!" Scotch turned around and waved at his companions. He then jumped on the rope hanging from above and quickly climbed up the cliff. A few seconds after they left, the whole ground continued to shake. A faint blue light came out of a hole on the top of the cave, and then the light turned orange. Countless cracks appeared on the mountain wall. Rocks flew down from the cliff, startled birds flew into the sky, and many magical beasts and animals hiding on the cliff began to climb out. The wood elves who were running for their lives could even see the rocks beside their feet trembling slightly. Not long after, the trembling finally stopped. Scotch stopped and looked back. Only then did he realize that the mountain above the cave had become much shorter. The one line of sky, canyon below had completely disappeared and was almost buried by the broken rocks. This meant that the internal structure of the cave had completely collapsed, and the people inside had almost no chance of survival. Chapter 979. In the previous battle, the mercenaries from the Ice Fist mercenary group were easy to deal with, but the well-trained members of the Holy Assembly caused him to suffer a lot of losses. There were a total of 8 people who came to carry out the mission, but only 5 returned. The other 3 were killed in the previous battle, but they paid the price. Scott killed all the humans outside the cave, and his shoulder was pierced by a short spear, causing him to bleed profusely. He knew that the wound couldn't be pulled out easily, so he cut off the handle of the short spear and left the spearhead in his shoulder, waiting to be dealt with when he returned to the village. Because of the surge of adrenaline during the battle, the pain was almost negligible. But after the battle ended, every step he took would affect his wound, and he was covered in cold sweat. 2 of his teammates also had arrow wounds, and they lost a lot of blood along the way. But with the magic crystal in their hands, they relied on their strong willpower to return to the village 7 kilometers away. When they were about to report to village chief body about the completion of the mission, they realized that the village was filled with people. Since the establishment of this village, there had never been 200 people at the same time. However, when Scott looked around, he saw that there were more than 400 people from more than 6 villages in the Silent Forest. Moreover, there were more than 600 people in the forest outside the villages, so it was certain that there were more than 600 of them. Why are there so many people? Scott looked at them with a face full of doubt, and he realized that all of them looked haggard. After all, the weather was freezing, and there was no shelter outside the village. No one could stand the cold wind for a long time. But among them, there were a few figures holding a magic crystal in their hands, and it was obvious that they were leaders. As long as they held a magic crystal, their backs would be straighter, and their tone and voice would be more forceful. Scott didn't think too much about it, and he kept wiping the sweat off his forehead. When the cold wind blew, he started to shiver. When he arrived in front of village chief Body's treehouse, there were already dozens of people surrounding it, and the temperature seemed to be higher. Seeing the wounds on his body, the wood elves from other villages hurriedly stepped aside. Seeing their reaction, Scott felt that he had completed his mission perfectly, so he proudly walked over with his chest puffed out. Village Chief Body's previous teachings made him believe that the scars on his body were the best medals of bravery. Facing the astonished and respectful gazes of the people around him, he felt that the pain seemed to have subsided a lot. When he saw Village Chief Body sitting on a brand new wooden chair, he suddenly froze. Who are you? Body, who was already showing signs of aging, had now completely changed. His appearance seemed to have been rejuvenated, and he looked at least 30 years younger. There were no wrinkles on his face, and upon closer inspection, his skin was so smooth that it seemed like there were no pores. I obtained true power. That's why I became what I am now. Body's originally green eyes were now purple, and his long hair was tied up. He was wearing a long robe, and he no longer held any magic crystal in his hand. However, the aura around his body was much stronger than the other wood elves. When Scott was being stared at by those eyes, he felt like he was being stared at by some kind of beast. Until Body asked, "Are you badly injured?" "Yes, it's okay, village chief." As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a sudden heat on his shoulder. When he turned his head to look, he found that the spearhead had been pulled out by an invisible force. The wound was bleeding, and the bone inside was clearly visible. He guessed that this kind of injury would be very difficult to heal, so he couldn't help but look at Body. The latter looked at the horrifying wound and said in a low voice, "It's nothing serious." Scott swallowed his saliva, but before he could say anything, he was dragged to the side of the magic circle by Body. Body, who had grown taller, turned around and said to the surrounding wood elves, "We have been oppressed in this forest for too long. That traitor Brody has betrayed us, and now he has become a pet of the humans. For the sake of food, he would even make his own people trade with the humans. He has long forgotten the pride of the wood elves." His speech was very impassioned, and the surrounding wood elves responded one after another. However, many of them looked a little stiff. Among them was Village Chief Frank. Like many other village chiefs, Frank was actually very happy to trade with the humans. If everyone could eat their fill during the winter, why not? However, they had no choice but to lower their heads. Body's methods were ruthless, and these village chiefs obviously had no way of resisting his power. Thus, they could only watch silently as the powerful wood elf continued to preach his pure blood theory. Fortunately, Body didn't say too much. He only reprimanded Brody's crimes and directly activated the magic circle. Scott, who was standing on the magic circle, instantly widened his eyes. He felt as if his body was being torn apart, and he didn't even have the strength to scream. He immediately knelt on the ground and fainted. With a flash of light, Body walked forward and pressed his hand on Scott's forehead. A few seconds later, Scott woke up. He stood up in surprise, and found that his body had undergone a huge change. The horrifying wound on his shoulder had completely healed. Not only that, his entire body was filled with energy, and he felt more than twice as strong as before. "How do you feel?" Body narrowed his eyes and looked at him. Scott suddenly stood up, and only then did he realize that he was half a head taller than before. At the same time, his body was also muscular, and he didn't look as skinny as before. I'm fine. Scott lowered his head and clenched his fist. Apart from the unprecedented strength, he found that he actually had the ability to control the element. He raised his head and flicked his finger at a giant tree not far away. A thin wind blade slashed across the trunk and left a shallow mark on it. This scene caused the surrounding wood elves to widen their eyes. It was obvious that Bodhi wanted Scott to give him a demonstration. While everyone was shocked and silent, he said in a low voice, "Using magic crystal alone is just the lowest form of power. Everyone, it's time to make a change." He pointed at the magic circle behind him. Although most of the wood elves in front of him were full of hesitation, many of them looked straight at him. In the silent forest, where the strong preyed on the weak, how many wood elves didn't want to control their own fate? Damn it! These wood elves want to trap us here until we die. Panda couldn't help but curse when he found out that the exit and more than 10 meters of the corridor had completely collapsed. But after he said that, he choked on the dust and coughed for a long time. Before he could wait for orders, the top of his head started to fall. This scared everyone and they hurriedly dodged to the side. Elementalist Lewis quickly used a spell to put up a shield. DeWitt couldn't help but shout, "Can your spells withstand it? Who knows how many tons of rocks there are? If they really fall, even a magus can't withstand it." Sweat appeared on Lewis's forehead. Although his words sounded a little dejected, it was indeed the truth. Although human magi could control the elements and use powerful spells, in the face of natural disasters, they were still very insignificant. "Retreat! This place is going to collapse." The soldiers in front of them shouted and retreated. After that, there was a crashing sound. Panda didn't suspect anything and immediately led his people to retreat. The other rooms more or less showed signs of collapse. Fortunately, the surroundings of the main passage were specially reinforced by magic, so it still maintained a certain degree of strength. In the end, they retreated 30 to 40 meters and stopped in a narrow corridor. It wasn't because it was safe, but because they met Roddy and the others who were coming out. Chapter 980. "That's good," Kardashian replied. She then raised the low-quality magic staff in her hand and cast a spell to freeze the cracked ceiling of the corridor. Seeing this, the two elementalists from the Ice Fist mercenary group also started casting spells. After 7 or 8 minutes, the dirt finally stopped falling. The people in the narrow space finally let out a sigh of relief. "Damn it! It must be those wood elves," Roddy scolded in a ruffian tone. At the same time, he patted the dirt off his hat and shoulders. Behind him, Iskar also spat. "When I get out, I'll definitely find them and kill them." "You guys kill them. Just leave some pretty girls for us, hee. Rubens and Sticka were like a pair of gay friends, laughing obscenely while dusting dirt off each other. As soon as they finished talking, Kardashian glared at them. "Don't you have anything else in your head? Do you think Natha doesn't exist?" "I'm joking. Don't take it to heart, Captain." Sticka quickly begged for mercy. Natha whispered, "These wood elves have a bad relationship with Elsa. They even beat up our villagers some time ago. Chief Broody almost got into a conflict with them. I don't know what happened. As a wood elf in the team, her identity was very sensitive at this moment." The mercenaries on Panda's side stared at her for a long time. DeWitt couldn't help but say, "This Miss Natha definitely isn't with them. Those wood elves who attacked us were all as thin as firewood. It's obvious that they didn't have enough to eat all year round. They can't compare to you at all." The mercenaries were naturally less wary of beautiful women. Natha didn't know how to smile either. She nodded to show her gratitude to DeWitt, who spoke up for her. This made Roddy feel a little smug. However, Natha then took out a water bag and instinctively wanted to pass it to Roddy. Roddy's hands moved even faster. He snatched the bottle and placed it in Kardashian's hands without hesitation. "Guild leader, drink some water first." Panda silently watched this scene. He didn't have any doubts about Natha, but he still had some doubts about Roddy's identity. "Everyone, let's take a break first." He greeted Devitt, and the mercenaries relaxed for the time being. However, both parties consciously occupied two parts of the corridor, with a distance of 3 meters between them. "Organize the food and water." After giving the order, he turned to Kardashian and said, "Commander Kardashian, what are your plans?" "Of course I'm going to find a way to get out." Kardashian's staff emitted a gentle light, illuminating the corridor. She looked up and continued, "I'm afraid there's only one exit here. I guess we can only dig out from here." It was unrealistic to dig a hole in a hard wall. Although magic could do this, the 3 mages present were not perpetual motion machines. Moreover, they didn't trust each other, so Panda didn't even mention this suggestion. As a mage, Panda didn't know how far magic could go. At this time, he could only say, "Then I'm afraid we'll have to work together to get out. Otherwise, if we waste too much time, it's very likely that we'll starve to death here." "We only brought water and a day's worth of dry food," Kardashian responded straightforwardly. "How about this, we'll reach a magic agreement with each other. Before we get out, we'll not have any conflicts and must work together to dig out the exit. What do you think?" "That's exactly what I want." Under Kardashian's suggestion, Panda quickly reached this magic agreement. Because of the magic agreement, there was less vigilance between the two sides. Everyone quickly began to organize their tools. In order to prevent bias, the two teams were mixed together into a rotating excavation team. At the same time, mages and mages were assigned to assist the 3 teams. Because it was a matter of life and death, no one proposed any nonsense. Soon, the first team began to dig towards the exit. Rubens and Eshin were the strongest, so they were arranged to be in the first team. They began to work with several other mercenaries from the Ice Fist mercenary group. The 2 of them had no complaints. Rubens even spat on his hands before starting to dig, looking like a country bumpkin. Roddy was in the third team. At this time, he first needed to recover his strength, so he sat on the side and chatted with Iskar. He seemed to be very talkative. After chatting for a while, Iskar went to the side and huddled with Stika to rest. Natha was a taciturn person, and Kardashian, as the leader, was also very cold. So when no one paid attention to Roddy, he began to talk to himself. First, he kept cursing the wood elves, and then he started to complain about the treasures in the cave being dug away. As he spoke, he leaned to the side and said to the resting priest, "God knows what's written on the wall. If I know anything, I can at least read the story." The priest ignored him, but Roddy didn't care. He crossed his legs and leaned against the wall. "You're right. The High Elves were able to make such beautiful sculptures hundreds of years ago. But look at them now." Nada said that the wood elves in the other villages are living like wild monkeys. They can't even make weapons, let alone sculptures. "That's right," Nada said with a smile. The priest glanced at Panda, who shook his head, gesturing for him not to say more. Roddy noticed their expressions but pretended not to see it. "By the way, where is this Moon God clan from? How come I've never heard of it before?" It would not be right if he did not answer this question, because it would mean that he was doubting his identity. Receiving Panda's gaze, the priest finally said, "The moon god Styrian is a god that coexists with the world. Its existence is as great and ancient as the world we live in." "Really? What do you do every day? Pray to the moon?" Roddy looked like he did not care. He laughed and said, "I know a few Rose Cross people. They talk nonsense all day, but I don't see any changes in them. They get sick when they need to, get hurt when they need to." The priest wanted to say something, but Roddy did not stop him. "I specifically asked him, 'Why does the god want you to suffer?' He told me, 'We all have sins and need to suffer to wash away our sins.'" "Ha ha ha ha. I've said this so many times that even I believe it. So when I get hurt, it's called getting hurt, and when I believe it, it's called atonement?" Then doesn't that mean that the one who gets hurt the most can go to heaven? There's no such thing in the Moon God clan. The priest finally could not help but refute. We are all children of nature, born from the world. Our prayers to the Moon God are just to make the world more peaceful, less violent, less sinful, and less conflicted. This is the true meaning of the existence of the Moon God Styrian. No war? Then what about us mercenaries? Isn't this the god who destroyed our jobs? Hey, I'm just joking. Roddy saw the priest's gloomy face and tried to smooth things over with a cheeky smile. He seemed to be talking nonsense, but in fact, he inadvertently revealed the outline of the Moon God clan. The doctrine was not just a few empty words, but it revealed the foundation of the entire sect. What the priest said made Roddy realize that the Moon God clan did not seem to be too aggressive. This was completely different from the Rose Cross and Viper Cross, who had a standing army and were always ready to declare war against the pagans. In other words, this peaceful sect was probably not very aggressive when it came to the use of divine art. Since you all yearn for peace, why do you still come to this place? He did not forget to add, I'm just asking casually. If it's offensive, it's fine if you don't answer. The Moon God clan is a religion that developed during the era of the High Elves, so we hope to find more books or records related to the doctrine. Currently, a lot of information about the Moon God clan is missing, and many prayers are incomplete. Chapter 981. There must be some kind of illusion in this ruin that allows people to see what they want. Panda continued, I've read several ancient books about the Moon God clan before, but I always felt that the other things here were not related to the Moon God clan. How could there be such a book out of nowhere? In the end, I checked it with my magic and found out that I was fooled. Roddy and Panda did not know that they were comparing their acting skills. Roddy immediately expressed his amazement after listening, but he did not show any intention to join the Moon God clan. Instead, he said, the Moon God Styrian is really more powerful than the other gods. Even I, a non-believer, am a little surprised. But I am too talkative. If I believe in religion, I'm afraid I will always say something inappropriate. Forget it. After chatting for a while, the attitude between the two forces was not as stiff as before. At this time, Panda asked, Charlie, has anyone said that you look like the Prime Minister, right? Roddy answered without changing his expression. Then he stood up, straightened his hat, cleared his throat, and tried to pretend to speak in a northern accent. Today, I would like to thank all the members of the Dragons for participating in this meeting. The peace of the Kingdom of Karen and even the whole world will depend on our joint efforts in the future. That, before he could finish his words, Iskar threw a stone at him. Are you addicted to pretending? If only you could be as quiet as Prime Minister Roddy. Can't you just stay quiet for a while? Roddy caught the stone and instantly changed back to his original wretched look. He no longer straightened his back, and his expression became slippery. If it wasn't for Age of Karen, I really wouldn't know that I look so similar to the Prime Minister. Not to mention, there were several times when I went to the tavern to eat, but they didn't accept my money. Haha, I won't be a mercenary in the future. I'm afraid I won't starve to death even if I go to this place to eat and drink. If you talk so much nonsense, I'll fire you when we get back. Kardashian suddenly interrupted. Roddy smiled awkwardly and retreated to the side. Yes, you're right. I won't say any more. Cough. Roddy deliberately acted as Roddy, which made Panda feel relieved. After all, he had never seen what the real Prime Minister looked like. The picture in the newspaper was definitely different from the real person. But no matter how he thought about it, how could a dignified Prime Minister give up his position of power and come here to explore the ruins with a wretched face? Although the mercenaries in this team were a little strange, there didn't seem to be anything suspicious about them. Just as they were talking, A clang sound came from not far away. Everyone quickly got up and realized that the members of the first group were running back covered in dust. Rubens was at the back, and he was covered in dirt. Damn it, I almost fell on him. Turned out that when they were digging, the part above them suddenly collapsed. If it weren't for Rubens's timely reminder, the others would have been crushed to death. Such a situation made everyone look at each other. Panda turned to look at Kardashian. Leader Kardashian, in this situation, why don't all the spellcasters keep an eye on them and do our best to protect them from digging? Sure. Kardashian agreed and exchanged a secret look with Roddy and Rubens. Panda didn't know that this was actually part of Roddy's plan. They disguised themselves as mercenaries and were trapped here. Their main purpose was to carefully understand what was going on with this Moon God clan. Originally, the ruins were bound to collapse, but Black Dragon Herlo Rubens just lifted his hand and the so-called disaster was easily resolved. As for the small-scale collapse, at this time, it was him who had deliberately caused it. 3 mages and 2 priests came to the front of the team. Rubens and the others patted the soil away. Because the place was narrow, only 4 people could dig at a time. The other 5 spellcasters began to use their own spells and divine spells to help carry the soil. The elementalist's method was to use Magician's Hand, plus elemental reinforcement, to prevent the structure from collapsing after digging. Panda chanted a prayer. With the casting of divine spells, several people who were digging were instantly shrouded in silver light. Rubens raised his head in surprise. What is this? I feel like I've become much stronger. Eshin easily lifted a huge rock that weighed more than 100 kilograms with both hands. The 2 ordinary mercenaries next to him also learned from him, and their efficiency suddenly increased a lot. Roddy looked on curiously. Hey, is it really that amazing? You'll know when you move it. Rubens replied impatiently. Listening to their conversation, Panda had already dispelled all doubts in his heart. He just treated them as ordinary mercenaries. For this reason, he focused all his energy on how to get out. It was obviously not enough to cast divine spells on the mercenaries. Panda estimated the time. Under the most ideal situation, they could only advance about 10 meters in a day. From here to the entrance of the cave was at least 30 meters, and no one knew what the situation outside the cave was. If the canyon was filled up, then their chances of survival were very slim. Because there was not enough food, everyone could only survive for 3 to 5 days before starving to death. Such a deduction was very cruel, but it was indeed the most likely reality. It was just that Panda did not dare to say it casually. The morale of the team was still high, and there were no sharp conflicts between the 2 sides. The longer this situation could be maintained, the better. If there was an internal conflict because of some small matter, then perhaps the last bit of hope would be shattered. Panda thought for a long time, and only came back to his senses when Kardashian called him. Leader Panda, it should be night now. Let's organize the team for dinner. Oh, okay. After the first team took turns, the second team began to dig. Iskar stepped forward and stretched his arms, and began to pick up the pickaxe. Rubens wiped the sweat from his forehead, picked up a water bag, and poured it into his mouth. In the end, after drinking 2 mouthfuls, it was snatched away by Roddy. Drink less. Rubens looked like he was about to lose his temper. Kardashian glanced at him. Charlie is right. Save it. Yes, leader. He replied in a low voice, and then became silent. Panda stepped forward to smooth things over. My team has brought more water. If necessary, you can allocate a few water bags. Now that everyone is facing a difficult situation, we need to work together to get out, right? Regarding this show of goodwill, Kardashian naturally had to show some gratitude with a smile. Roddy squatted at the side, eating jerky with his hat askew. He was trying to curry favor with Natha, but the latter's face was stiff, and it seemed like she did not want to talk to him. On the side, Eshin retracted his hands into his sleeves, and leaned against the collapsed stone slab to take a nap. His face was full of sweat and dirt. This was probably just a grassroots mercenary group. If it was not for Julia, a high-level mage, they probably would not even have the ability to enter this place. They did not have any hostility, and it was obvious that they had not experienced many battles. They looked very young, but this kind of people would probably not be alive after 3 years. Panda evaluated the strength of this group of mercenaries in his mind, and began to eat his food without worry. He ate quickly. Glancing at the members of the second group who were still digging, Panda said, "I'll go and pray first. It's night now, and I hope that the moon god can hear my prayers." The mages did not object. After all, these few mages had shown their strength before. Panda confirmed his position in the cave, knelt towards the western wall, and began to softly recite a prayer. Everyone went back to eating and drinking, and it seemed like no one cared what the two priests were chanting. But of course, they did not know that Roddy and the others narrowed their eyes, carefully reading the High Elf's prayer. Chapter 982. Roddy, whose back was facing Panda, glanced at Kardashian and mouthed something secretly. The latter blinked, got up, and came to Rubens's side. She asked with concern, "Are you still hungry? I saw that you put in a lot of effort, you should eat more." "It's okay, leader." Rubens waved his hand, then got up and said, "I'm going over there to relieve myself." Everyone had 3 needs, so no one was surprised by his request. There was still some space at the back of the narrow cave, so it was natural to go there to relieve oneself. Rubens came back after 2 minutes. As soon as he sat on the ground, everyone heard the sound of stones falling again. "Retreat! Run!" Iskar's voice was full of panic. The people in the second group immediately dropped their tools and ran back. As a result, after a few steps, stones began to fall from above. This time, the area was larger than before, and the roof that had been reinforced with magic had countless cracks. Panda and all the mages immediately realized the seriousness of the problem and began to cast magic to reinforce the roof. However, their magic seemed to be unable to resist the heavy boulders. With a loud crash, everyone's vision was covered by the dust that filled the air. When everything quieted down, everyone found that the place that they had been digging for half a day was filled with huge stones and dirt again. The place at the back that had not yet collapsed also collapsed. The whole team was compressed to less than 10 meters in this part of the corridor, almost unable to move. 3 mercenaries were injured by the stones, but their lives were not in danger. However, this sudden sense of urgency caused the morale of the team to fall to the bottom. People looked at the 2 leaders in despair. Kardashian's face was gloomy, and her hand holding the staff was a little pale. "Priest Panda, do you have any good ideas?" Panda wanted to say, "The only one who can save us is ourselves. If we continue to dig, there is still hope." But when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he realized that this was not the behavior of a believer of the Moon God clan, but the thinking of an arcanist. So the priest paused and said, "Now we can only try to save ourselves. I think we still have to dig. We can't just sit here and wait for death. And I will try to pray to Styrian for divine power." At this time, pray, Roddy was glared at by Kardashian halfway through his words. He immediately swallowed his words and bowed his head obediently. "I mean, of course, no problem." Panda breathed a sigh of relief. He had always been cautious. Seeing the opposition, he felt a little relieved. So he nodded to Kardashian to express his gratitude, then sat on the floor and began to recite the prayer over and over again, ********* at the same time. The forest of silence under the moonlight was not as quiet as usual. Usually, the wood elf villages were unusually quiet at night. But today, Linny's village obviously broke this rule. A large number of wood elves from 6 villages had gathered here, and the chatter around them had not stopped. After nightfall, the light in the center of the village continued to shine. Bursts of powerful magic fluctuations were coming from the center of the crowd every once in a while. They knew that another powerful warrior had been born. At this time, at the center of the magic circle, Body looked around at his young and magical subordinate. The smile and pride on his face could not be concealed anymore. When he first learned that Brody had opened trade with the humans, he was curious and conflicted. But not only did Brody make a fortune himself, he even sent food to the village in winter. Such behavior made everyone in the village extremely grateful, but it also made Body feel indescribable jealousy. Although Brody was nominally exchanging goods, who didn't know that he was buying people's hearts? Body was very concerned about the little power in his hands and had once dreamed of unifying the Wood Elves. Therefore, Brody's behavior made him instinctively think that Brody had the idea of annexing the village. What should he do with such a person? Now that he controlled powerful magic power and had a stronger body, Body's thoughts began to expand uncontrollably. First, we will flatten Urza village. Then we will let the humans know who is the master of this world. Long live the Wood Elves! The Wood Elves beside him no longer looked sallow and emaciated. They were full of spirit and even excited, and their eyes were full of bloodthirst. Because of the transformation of their bodies through the magic circle, they were fundamentally different from the Wood Elves around them. When they looked at their compatriots, there was a trace of arrogance and contempt in their eyes. Power and authority would make people lose themselves. Seeing their attitude, Body did not stop them. In his eyes, the Wood Elves who were not strengthened by the magic circle were indeed trash. Even those who could use the power of the magic crystal could only be counted as semi-finished products. Only by truly transforming the magic circle and obtaining the power of the magic crystal could the Wood Elves be qualified to become the overlords of this continent. Thinking of the magic circle and books he had found in the ruins, Body could not help but sigh that the Wood Elves had been blessed by fate. But just as he was reveling in it, the magic circle that was about to be activated suddenly exploded. Crack! The edge of the small magic circle suddenly shattered, and the power of the magic crystal instantly gushed out. The Wood Elf standing on the magic circle was a female. She wanted to dodge in fear, but her feet were stuck to the magic circle by a strange force, and she could not move at all. Her shabby fur coat was completely torn by the surging power, and her naked body was revealed in front of everyone. Save me! Ah! The magic crystal that was out of control could only explode. Seeing that tragedy was about to happen, Body clenched his teeth and opened his arms. With a roar, the surging power that was about to explode was forcibly stopped by him. If there were any human mages here, their jaws would definitely drop. Because normal mages did not have the ability to go against the magic crystal that was about to explode. Even magisters had to think about how much magic power they had, because if they could not withstand it, they would be blown into pieces. Body's ability was different from normal mages. He seemed to have a strong control over the chaotic power of the magic crystal. But with just him alone, it was impossible for him to completely suppress the power of the magic circle. His subordinates that had just finished their transformation immediately surrounded him to help. They did not know how to cast spells, nor did they understand any magic theories, but when it came to the magic crystal, they seemed to have an almost instinctive control over it. With their help, the power of the magic circle that was about to explode finally disappeared. Body rushed forward 2 steps and directly removed the magic crystal embedded in it. The magic circle that was about to collapse finally stopped, and the naked Wood Elf in the center of the magic circle completely fainted. Body squinted his eyes and pressed his hand on her forehead. But the Wood Elf did not wake up as quickly as Scott. This situation made Body frown. But after a few attempts, the unconscious Wood Elf finally opened her eyes. But she seemed to have lost the ability to speak. When she opened her eyes wide and looked at Body, The unfamiliar gaze made him narrow his eyes. "Help Ariel to rest." Body stretched out his hand and put his cloak on her. But he added, "Jax Mobley, watch from the side." "Yes, village chief." The two who responded were the transformed wood elves. They were a little confused as to why Body gave such an order, but they obeyed unconditionally. After they took Ariel away, Body began to observe the magic circle to find the root of the problem. Chapter 983. No matter how big or small a magic circle was, it had to be maintained regularly and couldn't be used continuously for a long time. Body didn't know this and almost lost control of the magic circle. After careful examination, he found that the main structure of the magic circle was damaged by the overflow of energy and couldn't be repaired at all. Therefore, if he wanted to continue the transformation, he had to make a new magic circle. Barty's original goal had been to use up all the mana crystals transported from the ruins to create as many wood elf subordinates as possible with combat power. Although the transformed wood elves were strong, they also needed more food to replenish their energy. Body's appetite now was more than 5 times that of before, and he had to eat meat to barely keep his body functioning. Although he had a lot of people under his control, he was really short of resources. But now that he had a strong team, Body naturally wanted to target the rich people of his kind. Urza village was his next target. With a clear goal in mind, Body was very decisive when he made a decision. He let the people around him go to rest first, and he quickly began to carve the magic circle under the moonlight. Because of his previous hard practice, the carving of the magic circle was very fast. Body even expanded the area of the magic circle by 3 times. He didn't do this because he thought he was smart, but because there was an important point recorded in the book. When the magic circle was activated in this way, it could transform 3 people at once, and at the same time consume less magic crystal, but the price was that the transformed people's strength would be weaker than the previous single magic circle. Barty couldn't have asked for more. He understood the importance of having absolute control. His loyal subordinates were strong, and the wood elves on the fringes were slightly weaker. This was the most logical form of governance. He had a good plan, and the carving of the magic circle was also very accurate. However, when he was about to finish in the middle of the night, the quiet village suddenly burst into exclamations. "What's going on?" Body had a bad feeling. He took a few steps forward and found that the people who stayed behind were all looking up at the sky. Looking up, Body instantly froze on the spot. The bright moon in the sky was emitting a soft silver light, much brighter than usual. Most importantly, everyone could see that there was a silver satin-like mist descending from the sky and directly falling onto the ground. When heaven and earth were used as a yardstick, the distance and length would be astonishing. No one knew how far the beam of light was, but Body was sure that from his point of view, the beam of light seemed to be right in front of him. Body didn't think too much about it when a large lunar halo appeared. But now that such a strange phenomenon had appeared, even if he was a fool, he would know that something had happened. He quickly climbed up the wooden ladder to the tallest tree at the edge of the village. His vision of more than 40 meters made him realize that there was still some distance to go before the light beam landed. However, when he looked at the silhouette of the mountain in the distance that was illuminated by the silver light, Body's expression changed drastically. That was where he had found the High Elf ruins. "Grab your weapons. Gary, take your team and stand guard here to maintain order. The rest of you, follow me." Body tightened his grip on the wand in his hand. This was the only magic weapon he had found in the ruins. The silver light above his head grew brighter and brighter. The team of more than 20 people quickly disappeared into the snow-covered forest after leaving the village. In the collapsed ruins, Roddy and the others who were still digging stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Panda in the middle of the narrow corridor. He had been chanting prayers for 2 to 3 hours, but there was no effect. At first, everyone was still looking forward to it, but in the end they all felt that the endless prayers were really annoying. But Panda didn't give up. He kept chanting, and his voice grew louder and louder until a beam of light suddenly fell from the cracked ceiling. No one knew his current state of mind. Panda's expression had already fallen into a trance. He could no longer hear the gasps of surprise from the mercenaries around him, and his vision was no longer in the dark and cramped corridor. He was still repeating the prayers over and over again. Even if his mouth was dry and his lips cracked, he didn't stop. The light came out of nowhere and fell on him. At this time, Panda had already closed his eyes and stood up with his arms open. "What's going on?" asked Roddy. He quickly exchanged glances with the other dragons and found that they all had serious expressions on their faces. In the ruins, Rubens had used spells to constantly reduce the living space of the team. Naturally, it was to allow Panda to use as many divine spells as possible to determine the reason why the Moon God clan had broken the illusion. But now, everything that happened was clearly beyond the dragon's imagination. In the silver light, everyone saw that the ceiling above their heads had started to disintegrate and melt like ice. In Roddy's understanding, matter could not appear and disappear out of thin air. But at this time, a long straight path gradually appeared on the ceiling. It did not cause any debris to fall. Instead, the rocks and soil in the middle directly disappeared into the air under everyone's eyes. When the light gradually dimmed, Roddy stood up and saw a beam of silver light shining on Panda's cloak, giving it a pale white glow. He took 2 steps forward and looked up. He found that from here, along the straight path above his head, he could directly see the bright moon. "May the moonlight shine on the earth forever." Panda finished chanting the last line of the prayer and opened his eyes. He had his head slightly raised, and at this time, his eyes just happened to see the moonlight at the end of the path. There was no surprise on the priest's face. He just breathed a sigh of relief. "We are saved. This is a real miracle. Priest Panda, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'm afraid I would never have believed that such a thing could happen," Kardashian exclaimed. Her words seemed to revive the stunned people around them. Excitement spread. The other priest loudly thanked the moon god, kneeling on the ground and loudly praised the moon god's name. The surviving mercenaries also laughed loudly, celebrating this important moment in their lives. Roddy reached out and pulled up Rubens, who was lying on the ground, to rest. He made a hugging gesture. "Great. We can go out now." Rubens, whose face was covered in mud, also cheered. However, when Roddy patted his back hard, he mouthed, "Don't show any flaws." After that, he quickly glanced at the dragons around him. Eshin, Iskar, and Stika were all covered in dust and looked embarrassed. At this time, each of them put on the appearance that survivors should have. However, they were all paying attention to Roddy's posture. When they saw his palm pressing down, they tacitly continued to maintain their original expressions. Natha tried to smile, but her expression was very stiff. In the end, she chose to give up acting and maintained a cold expression. Fortunately, no one cared about her expression. After a short period of excitement, everyone began to discuss how to go up. In the end, they decided that the shortest Stika would be the first to climb up. The latter happily agreed. Then, with the help of the 2 big guys, Iskar and Rubens, he climbed up into the circular path with a diameter of 1 meter. Although the path was a bit sloping, it was not easy for people to climb up. After Stika went up, he found that the inner wall of the path was very smooth. The appearance of a miracle naturally meant that a god had personally made a move. He touched the surface of the seemingly polished rock and squinted his eyes. Then, using both his hands and feet, he quickly climbed up the inner wall on both sides. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.